Hello everyone, I am the storyteller, here to guide you through a creepy tale whispered in the darkness between sleep and wakefulness. Before we begin, please like, share, and subscribe. It is the most precious gift, it motivates me to continue telling stories. And tell me, where are you watching from? What time? Now, get comfortable. Let the quiet darkness surround you as we gently enter a story that clings like a cold breath on your neck. The scent of death is a stubborn thing. It lingers long after the body is gone, weaving invisibly through walls and carpets, settling into the cracks like dust that refuses to be swept away. 3 days after Mrs. Kowalski's funeral, I noticed at first, a faint, musty odor drifting faintly in the elevator, something like dried flowers mixed with stale perfume. The maintenance man assured me every corner of the building had been scrubbed clean, but the smell remained, persistent, as if the very bricks had absorbed her essence during her 15 years as building manager. At first, I dismissed it, as I did the strange creaking echoing through the ventilation shafts each night. Exactly 3:17 a.m., the building groaned and whispered like a living thing disturbed from slumber. Old buildings make noise, I told myself. Old buildings keep memories. But they should stay silent when the dead finally rest. Then the notes began. The first was slipped under my door on a Tuesday morning. The handwriting was unmistakable, cramped, shaky cursive, as if the writer bore a grudge against the paper itself. The note read: Violation, drove 347B. Unauthorized decorative item in hallway facing window. Fine, 75 hours. Due immediately. I stared at the small cactus on my windowsill. The very same plant Mrs. Kowalski had cited me for 3 times before. She had grudgingly allowed it after I filed proper paperwork she mysteriously lost twice. My hands trembled. This had to be a mistake or a prank. The new temporary manager, Paul, Mrs. Kowalski's nephew, hadn't even moved into her apartment yet. How could he know about the rule? I crumpled the note and tossed it in the trash. But the next morning, it was back, lying pristine on my kitchen counter. My breath caught. I live alone. No one else has keys except the building manager, and she was buried a week ago. The door was locked, chain in place. Windows secure. No sign of forced entry. Logic screamed I had imagined it, a trick of stress. Yet, the cold sweat on my brow said otherwise. I folded the note and kept it with me. Later, I handed it to Jorge, the daytime doorman of 20 years. Who issued this? He asked, eyes narrowing. No one. It must be a mistake, I said. Jorge crossed himself, a quick, nervous gesture. No one is checking the notes now. Paul isn't here yet. That night, as I lay in bed, the elevator hummed to life, an eerie sound I knew well. At 2:48 a.m., when the elevators should have been locked down. Something wasn't right. What I did not tell you yet is that this was just the beginning. Over the following nights, the disturbances grew. Shadows shifted at the edge of my vision. Cold spots appeared without warning. The faint scent of decay permeated the hallways. Every time I checked, nothing was there, but the feeling of being watched never left. Then came the second note, more demanding, more furious. Violation, 428F. Unauthorized entry into maintenance areas. 100 hours fine. Immediate payment required. I had not set foot beyond the lobby since the funeral. This was impossible. The nights grew darker, colder. Whispers fluttered just beyond comprehension. Sometimes I heard a faint tapping on my door. No one there when I looked. One evening, a power outage cloaked the building in silence. The emergency lights flickered weakly, casting long, monstrous shadows. I stood frozen in the hallway. A cold draft brushed past, and I heard it, a faint sigh, like a breath escaping from beneath the floorboards. In the darkness, my phone lit up with a new message. It wasn't from a number I recognized. Your time runs out soon, it read. My heart hammered as I dropped the phone. The walls seemed to close in. Then I saw it, a pale figure, shimmering, just beyond the staircase landing. I blinked. It was gone. Days later, the building's history unveiled itself. Old residents whispered of Mrs. Kowalski's secret life, of grudges held too tightly, of a presence that would not let go. Rumors spoke of an accident during her tenure, a tragedy she hid behind a smile. I began piecing together fragments of her story, a web of control, fear, and perhaps something far darker. One night, drawn by a force I could not explain, I ventured into the basement. The air thickened, and a faint glow pulsed from the old furnace room. Inside, the walls were scrawled with names and dates, some fresh, some faded. Then the whisper came again, louder, "You cannot escape." The door slammed shut behind me. From this moment, my life fractured. Every note, every shadow, every creak became a thread in a tapestry of dread I could neither ignore nor understand. Was it Mrs. Kowalski's spirit punishing the living? Or something more sinister, hiding beneath the surface of this decaying building? The elevator hummed its eerie song each night, as if summoning something beyond this world. I knew then, I was trapped in a nightmare stitched from the past and alive with restless souls. I won't spoil the ending here. But if you choose to listen closely, you'll hear the faint creak of the elevator, the scent of dried flowers mixed with decay, and the scratch of a pen writing the next warning. Sleep well, and remember, some buildings remember too much. The footage froze on that frame, the moment I stepped toward the elevator. Then, as if a dark mist crept into the lens, the image blurred and flickered. What came next defied explanation. The camera angle shifted inexplicably, focusing not on me, but on something else, something shadowed, formless, yet unmistakably there. A figure emerged. It wasn't human, or at least not entirely. Its outline wavered like smoke caught in a breeze, an eerie distortion of light and shadow. It hovered just beyond the elevator doors, its shape coalescing slowly, as if materializing from the very darkness itself. No face, no features, only a vague suggestion of a twisted silhouette. I stared, frozen, as it reached out, a limb or tendril stretching toward me, though in the video I never moved an inch forward. Instead, my reflection in the glass seemed to recoil in terror. The figure flickered again, vanishing with a soft, rasping sigh that the microphone barely captured but my ears imagined in vivid detail. I rewound and played the scene over and over, each time the figure's presence sinking deeper into my soul. The next morning, my skin felt raw, as if unseen eyes had watched me through the night. The notes continued to arrive, demanding, accusing, relentless, each bearing that signature flourish of Evelyn Kowalski. But something had changed. The air grew heavier. The halls darkened at unexpected moments. Lights flickered not from faulty wiring, but as if something in the building was restless, agitated. One evening, as I returned home late, the lobby was empty, eerily silent. The elevator doors opened before I could press the button, revealing an empty car, bathed in sickly, flickering light. I stepped inside, compelled by an impulse I could neither resist nor understand. The doors shut behind me with a sharp clang. The car began its ascent, slow, deliberate. At each floor, the elevator paused, doors sliding open to reveal empty corridors, cold and shadowed. But at the fifth floor, I caught a glimpse of something. A flash of movement. A whisper of breath. I peered into the darkness beyond the threshold, heart pounding. Then the smell, intensely pungent now, the sickly sweet scent of dried flowers, rotten yet oddly fragrant, curling around me like a living thing. Suddenly, a whisper echoed from the shadows, low and hissing. "Not yours to enter." My breath hitched. The doors slammed shut before I could react. The elevator jolted, dropping rapidly, sending a harsh jolt through my body. The lights flickered violently, plunging me into near darkness before the emergency bulbs glowed dimly. When the doors opened again, I was in the basement, the forbidden level, where the building's secrets festered. The basement was colder, damper, smelling of rust and decay. The faint glow from my phone barely pierced the thick darkness. I stepped out, the elevator doors closing behind me like the ceiling of a crypt. Footsteps echoed in the distance, slow, deliberate, yet no one was visible. I reached the maintenance room door. It was ajar. Inside, old tools and discarded furniture lay scattered. On the wall, scratched in frantic scrawls, were words I could barely make out. Release her, free the debt. The whispering returned, circling like a predator. I felt a presence behind me, cold fingers brushing my neck. I spun, heart leaping, but saw only darkness. Then the faintest, most chilling sound, a soft, sorrowful weeping, echoing from deep within the walls. I ran, back to the elevator, fists shaking as I pressed the button repeatedly. The doors slid open. I leapt inside, slamming them shut just as a shadow lunged at the opening. That night, I knew the building was alive, feeding on fear, on secrets, on the restless spirit of Evelyn Kowalski. And I was its next victim. The basement's stale air was suffocating. Every breath I took seemed to draw in not only dust and mold but something darker, something ancient and suffocating. My flashlight trembled in my hand as I scanned the walls. Faint stains marred the concrete, dark splotches that might have been water, or something far more sinister. The scribbled message still clung to my mind: release her, free the debt. The words were repeated, scratched again and again, overlapping like a desperate prayer or a curse. I moved deeper, drawn by the sound of that sorrowful weeping, echoing through the pipes and broken tiles. The sound was mournful but haunting, a voice pleading for justice or forgiveness. The maintenance room door groaned on its hinges behind me. I turned sharply. Nothing. But the oppressive silence that followed was worse than any sound. A chill ran down my spine as the whispering returned, soft and yet distinct. You belong to the debt now. My heart slammed against my ribs. I fumbled for my phone, switching on its flashlight, illuminating the room in a weak circle of cold white light. Shadows writhed along the walls, twisting and distorting like living things. Near the furnace, I spotted an old ledger book. Its pages were yellowed and brittle. The cover bore the building's name, but inside, it held records unlike any I expected. There were names, dozens of them, each crossed out, except one. Her name. Evelyn Kowalski. Beneath it, a scrawled note. 15 years of keeping order, but order is a chain, not a shield. The debt's unpaid, the wrongs undone. I flipped the pages faster, searching for answers, but the ledger dissolved into scribbles and cryptic symbols, resembling some ancient code. My mind spun with questions. What had she done to deserve this torment? What debt had bound her to this place beyond death? Suddenly, the temperature dropped. My breath fogged before me in thick clouds. I heard the scraping again, closer this time. I spun, shining the light wildly. A shadow darted across the far corner, too quick to catch. But the floor beneath it was stained dark, as if something had dragged itself across the concrete. I swallowed my fear and stepped back toward the exit. But the door slammed shut with the force of a hurricane. I pounded on it, screaming, but the walls seemed to absorb my voice. The whispering grew louder, now surrounding me. Set me free, or join the debt. Panic surged. I banged harder until finally, the door creaked and opened. I bolted, sprinting up the stairs, heart pounding so loudly I feared it would burst. Returning to my apartment, I felt no relief. The building seemed alive, a breathing entity filled with unseen eyes and whispering voices. Over the next days, my sleep fragmented into restless nightmares. In dreams, I saw Mrs. Kowalski's face, stern, unforgiving, yet laced with sadness. Her eyes followed me. Her voice echoed, sometimes pleading, sometimes threatening. Balance the books. Pay the debt. Strange phenomena escalated. The cactus on my windowsill withered and dried overnight. The air filled with that stifling perfume of decay. Lights flickered even when the wiring was checked. Doors slammed without cause. The elevator's hum became a lullaby of dread. I began to question my sanity. Was I being haunted by a restless spirit seeking justice? Or was something far darker at play? The notices multiplied. Each one more ominous, more personal. One morning, I found a letter slipped beneath my door, sealed with red wax bearing a strange symbol I didn't recognize. Inside was a single line written in the same cramped cursive. The debt is not paid. Your time is short. I held the letter, feeling the wax burn cold against my fingers. Jorge refused to discuss the notes anymore, his eyes hollow with fear. Paul still hadn't moved into the building. No one else seemed aware of these messages. It was as if the building itself was punishing me. One night, unable to bear the suffocating atmosphere, I ventured into the hallway to confront the source. The elevator doors stood open, light spilling into the corridor like a pale invitation. Steeling myself, I stepped inside. The air was thick, almost viscous, charged with unseen energy. The doors closed behind me, sealing me inside the womb of darkness. As the elevator ascended, the lights flickered violently. A whisper echoed in my ear. Balance the debt, or be claimed. The elevator stopped. The doors opened to a corridor bathed in unnatural shadows. Ahead, the silhouette of a woman stood waiting. Her face was the face of Evelyn Kowalski, twisted by sorrow, rage, and something far more ancient. She reached out her hand. And I knew then, this was not just a haunting. This was a reckoning. Her hand hovered inches from mine, trembling like a fragile flame in a violent wind. The air between us was charged, thick with a sorrow so profound it pressed down on my chest, threatening to crush my very breath. Her eyes, those hollow, haunted eyes, locked with mine, imploring and condemning all at once. You carry the weight, she whispered, voice like the rustling of dead leaves, the debt unpaid binds us both. My fingers twitched, drawn forward, yet my heart screamed in terror. I wanted to pull back, to flee this spectral judgment, but my body betrayed me. I reached out, fingertips brushing hers, and the world shifted. The elevator walls melted away into shadows, and suddenly I was standing in a long, dim corridor lined with doors, each one marked with a faded plaque and a date. Some dates were centuries old. Mrs. Kowalski's voice echoed again, this time stronger, filled with a bitter fury. Behind each door lies a story. A debt unpaid. A life broken. And the price is endless. A chill swept through me as the corridor stretched into infinity. I saw reflections in the dark glass of the doors, faces, memories, screams frozen in time. Shadows moved behind the cracked glass, trapped souls desperate for release, for justice, for vengeance. I turned to Mrs. Kowalski's apparition. Why me? I whispered. What do you want from me? Her gaze softened, but the sorrow remained. Because you live where I died. Because your soul is not free from the weight of this building's secrets. Because only the debt can be balanced, and the cycle broken. The floor beneath us trembled. Suddenly, one door creaked open, revealing a room bathed in crimson light. Inside, I saw a younger Evelyn, alive and vibrant, arguing fiercely with shadowy figures, bureaucrats, neighbors, faceless men in suits, her voice rising in desperation. They pointed fingers, whispered accusations, binding her in chains woven from greed, fear, and betrayal. Her screams echoed in the corridor, merging with the cries of the other trapped souls. I staggered back, overwhelmed by the raw pain of those unseen tragedies. Mrs. Kowalski's voice cut through the chaos. You must find the truth. Uncover the debt. Set us free. The elevator jolted and returned me to my apartment, but I was changed. The oppressive presence clung to me, a shadow in my soul. Determined, I began digging into the building's history, past tenants, complaints, rumors. I found whispers of a scandal buried years ago, illegal evictions, mysterious disappearances, and a fatal accident covered up by the homeowners association. Mrs. Kowalski had been the enforcer, wielding her authority like a weapon, but also a prisoner of something darker. One name appeared repeatedly, Margaret Halloran, a tenant who vanished without explanation. I sought out old newspapers, public records, even spoke with longtime residents. The pieces fit together like a puzzle soaked in blood and betrayal. One stormy night, the building's power flickered and died. The halls were swallowed by darkness. Drawn by a force I couldn't resist, I ventured to the basement again. There, amidst the decaying pipes and shadows, I found a hidden door, one not on any blueprint. Beyond it lay a small room, walls covered in charred symbols, a circle scorched into the concrete floor. In the center, a withered wreath of dried flowers, the same scent that haunted me. As I stepped forward, a cold voice filled the room. "You came." Mrs. Kowalski's form materialized fully, sorrow replaced by fury. "Help me break the chains or be consumed by the debt." The walls seemed to close in. I knew then I faced a choice, surrender to the darkness or fight for freedom, hers, mine, and all the lost souls bound here. There, in the back corner of the elevator, barely visible amid the flickering lights, the very air seemed to ripple and shimmer, like the wavering heat rising from sun-baked asphalt on a summer afternoon. The distortion pulsed softly, vague yet unmistakably human-shaped, bending reality around it in ways no ordinary shadow could. And then, next to my own frozen face reflected in the glass, a flash, a cruel, fleeting glimpse, of something else appeared. A gaunt visage, pale and wind-whipped, with hollow, endless eyes and a twisted mouth pulled into a grimace of eternal agony. It was there for only a single frame before vanishing, like a nightmare snatched away before waking. My legs nearly gave way beneath me. The coldness of dread crept up my spine and settled in my gut like a stone. I replayed the footage again and again, desperate to convince myself it was a glitch, a trick of compression or an artifact of the camera's aging sensor, anything but what it truly was. The weekend guard, noticing my pale face and trembling hands, drifted over silently. "Find what you were looking for?" he asked, voice low and cautious. I pointed to the screen, but as I hit rewind and played the clip again, the anomaly was gone. No shimmer. No distorted face. No trace of anything unusual, only an empty elevator car and a man, me, staring into it with growing madness. The guard looked at me with a mix of pity and concern. "Sometimes the old building gets to you, if you let it," he said softly. "Maybe you should get some rest." That afternoon, I began to ask the other residents about strange happenings since Mrs. Kowalski's death. Most conversations were terse, laced with evasions and nervous glances. But Mrs. Chen, from apartment 5C, confided in a whisper that her thermostat reset itself every morning at precisely 3 a.m., plunging her into cold for hours. Mr. Delaney in 7B admitted to hearing persistent knocking at exactly 3:17 a.m. for 3 consecutive nights. When he opened the door, nothing. Just the empty, silent corridor. The Sullivans on the second floor reported finding every family photo turned face down every morning, no matter how securely they'd arranged them before bed. I wasn't alone. The building was haunted not only by a restless spirit but by a creeping malaise that clung to all of us. Yet no one dared speak openly, as if naming it might awaken something worse. Their eyes held the same haunted, hollow look I glimpsed in my own reflection, eyes that had seen too much, and yet not enough to explain the terror that gripped us. That evening, I brought the mounting stack of notes bearing Mrs. Kowalski's unmistakable signature back to the front desk. As I turned to leave, Jorge, the longtime doorman who had always maintained a stoic distance, grabbed my wrist for the first time ever. "Mr. Harmon," he whispered urgently, his face creased with worry, "before she died, Mrs. Kowalski was changing the rules every day. Hundreds of new rules, she stayed up all night writing them down." He glanced nervously around, as if the walls themselves might overhear. "The doctor said it was dementia, but she insisted she'd never leave this place. That it was her life's work." She swore she would enforce the rules forever. A cold weight settled in my stomach. I thanked Jorge and retreated to my apartment. There, hours passed as I scoured the internet, hunting for stories about haunted building managers, apartment hauntings, cleansing rituals, anything that might help me understand, or escape, what was happening. The advice was contradictory and often absurd. Smudging with sage, salt lines, holy water, crystals, none felt right. By midnight, my eyes burned from the harsh glow of the screen, and my temples throbbed with tension. That night, I resolved not to wait passively for the elevator's spectral summons. Instead, I dragged a chair into the hallway, positioning it directly opposite the elevator doors. If Mrs. Kowalski's spirit wished to continue her reign of bureaucratic terror, I would confront it head-on. I had long regretted not standing up to her when she was alive. I refused to make the same mistake now that she was dead. Minutes dragged with torturous slowness. The building settled and groaned around me, alive and watchful. At 2:47 a.m., the temperature in the hallway plummeted. My breath formed thick clouds, and my hands turned numb despite the building's usually aggressive heating system. At precisely 2:48, the elevator hummed to life. My pulse thundered in my ears as the floor indicator crept upward. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. The doors slid open with their pneumatic sigh. The elevator was empty, but the same distortion I'd seen on the footage shimmered faintly, a rippling presence without form. The scent hit me next, dried flowers mixed with stale perfume, so strong it made my eyes water. Then, slowly, impossibly, the apparition began to take shape. A pale outline solidified, a figure clothed in the muted hues of faded authority. And as her form grew clearer, I recognized the haunting face of Evelyn Kowalski, once fierce and unforgiving, now twisted with sorrow and an unyielding will. First, there was only the outline. A small, hunched figure lingering in the far corner of the elevator, barely more than a shifting shadow against the flickering light. Then the details began to fill in: orthopedic shoes, worn and scuffed, resting on swollen ankles encased in faded support hose. A floral dress, once vibrant but now dulled and outdated by decades, draped her thin frame like a tattered shroud. Her face emerged last. Papery skin stretched taut over sharp cheekbones, lips thin and pressed into a permanent line of disapproval. And then, her eyes. Eyes that burned with a fierce intensity that transcended the world of the living. They pierced me, cold and unyielding. My mouth went dry. My lungs seemed to forget how to draw breath. Every muscle in my body coiled tight, ready to flee, yet some ancient, primal instinct rooted me to the spot. I knew, without understanding how, that running would only make things worse. She held a stack of papers in her translucent hands, violation notices, hundreds of them, each one bearing my name, scrawled in a meticulous, unforgiving hand. One slow step forward, and the overhead lights exploded into a violent flicker. Her voice came not through my ears, but directly into my mind, a whisper both everywhere and nowhere. "Mr. Harmon," she intoned, "you have outstanding fines. Payment is overdue." Finding my voice felt like pulling it from the depths of the abyss. "You're dead, Mrs. Kowalski," I said, voice trembling but firm. "You don't manage this building anymore." Her form shimmered, flickering like an old analog television losing signal. "The building is mine. The rules are mine. I enforce the rules." "You're dead," I repeated, astonished at my own courage in the face of the supernatural. "Your rules died with you." Rage twisted her spectral features. The papers she held began to smoke and curl at the edges, their edges blackening and smoldering like burnt parchment. "I am the rules," she hissed. Suddenly, the hallway lights exploded into sparks and darkness engulfed us, broken only by the eerie glow radiating from her. Adrenaline surged, fight or flight surged through me, and I chose fight. Not with fists. Ghosts aren't something you can punch. But with bureaucracy. The one weapon Mrs. Kowalski had respected above all else. According to Building Bylaw 15.7, I said, voice steadier now, recalling every regulation I'd combed through during our disputes. Upon the death or permanent incapacitation of a building manager, all policies implemented solely by that manager without board approval are subject to immediate review and potential nullification. Her form wavered like a candle flame caught in a draft. I pressed on. Furthermore, Bylaw 22.3 specifically states no financial penalties may be imposed without written documentation filed with both the Homeowners Association and the County Clerk's Office. Your death nullified your authority to file such documentation. The ghost recoiled as though physically struck. The papers flaked into glowing cinders that floated upward and vanished. Her rage vibrated the air itself. This is my building, she hissed, form becoming less distinct. They will never care for it as I did. They will let it fall to ruin without my rules. The building will be fine, Mrs. Kowalski, I said, softening my tone. Your job is done. The rules will continue without you. For a moment, uncertainty flickered across her fading visage. Then, with a sound like tearing fabric, her form collapsed inward, condensing into a pinpoint of brilliant light that hovered briefly before shooting upward through the elevator ceiling. The doors slid closed with a soft pneumatic sigh. The car descended to the lobby. Emergency lights flickered on, bathing the hallway in a dim red glow. I sat there trembling, the remnants of fear and adrenaline coursing through my veins until dawn. No more notes appeared under my door that morning, nor on any morning after. 2 weeks later, Paul Kowalski moved into his aunt's old apartment and assumed his duties as the new building manager. Where she had been rigid and unforgiving, he was easygoing and reasonable. He modernized the building's archaic rules, replacing the ancient rulebook with a streamlined digital system. Life in the building improved dramatically. But sometimes, in the deepest, darkest hours of the night, I still hear the elevator hum to life during lockdown. And sometimes, just for a moment, I catch the faintest scent of dried flowers and stale perfume drifting on the stale night air. It still ascends to my floor, the elevator's mechanical hum piercing the quiet of the night. The doors part, spilling pale light onto the empty hallway, and it waits, silent, expectant, as though awaiting a passenger who never comes. I no longer chase shadows or question its eerie summons. Instead, from behind the safety of my locked door, I call out softly, steadying my voice. The building is in good hands, Mrs. Kowalski. You can rest now. Eventually, the doors close with their familiar pneumatic sigh, and the elevator descends back to the lobby. Yet, I know she lingers still, patrolling the corridors she once ruled with an iron will and relentless vigilance. Her presence lingers, reluctant to relinquish her self-appointed duty, even in death. The rules were her religion, the building her church. Some devotions, it seems, transcend even the final boundary between life and death. Over time, I have learned to live with her presence, and so have the others. We honor her quietly, in small acts of acknowledgement, straightening crooked picture frames, wiping shoes carefully before entering, keeping noise to a respectful minimum after 10 p.m. Not out of fear, but out of respect for a woman who, despite her flaws, truly believed she was preserving order in a chaotic world. On some sleepless nights, when the silence weighs heavy and the world feels thin, I swear I hear the soft shuffle of orthopedic shoes in the hallway and the faint whisper of paper sliding beneath doors. In those moments, I remind myself, some rules are meant to be followed, and others, challenged. The wisdom lies in knowing the difference. Sometimes, that wisdom comes from the most unexpected sources, even from beyond the grave. The first thing I noticed was not the impossible bells, but the silence that preceded them. A vacuum of sound that seemed to press against my eardrums, a breath held before the thunder's roar. I had been foolish enough to think isolation was what I needed. Now, standing alone on the barren promontory, with my rental car already swallowed by the twisting access road, I understood that isolation was the last refuge a sane man should seek. I had come to Craven Point Lighthouse on the advice of my therapist. Somewhere quiet, she had said, somewhere you can think without distraction. After the breakdown, the letter from Janet, the collapse of my career in spectacular ruin, I needed space to rebuild. The lighthouse keeper's quarters were available for extended rental in the off-season. No internet. Spotty cell service. Just me, the rocky coastline, and the steady sweep of the rotating beacon to lull me to sleep. Perfect for healing, the rental agent had promised. His voice had wavered, a hesitation I failed to recognize as a warning. Before me, the lighthouse rose like a stark white finger, accusing the overcast sky. Its paint peeled in long strips that fluttered in the wind, like skin shed after a slow death. The keeper's quarters, a small stone building clinging to the lighthouse's base, looked even more weathered, copper gutters tinged green by salt spray, windows clouded and cracked. The entire structure perched atop a promontory of rock jutting into what should have been the sea. Except the sea was gone. No waves crashed against the rocks below. No salt spray misted the air. Instead, a vast mudflat stretched before me, a cracked, desiccated plain reaching the horizon. I checked my phone, it confirmed this was still the Atlantic coast. The ocean had simply retreated, pulled away as if abandoning this place. The rental agent mentioned unusual tidal patterns, low water levels never before seen. But this was not low tide. This was absence. The mudflats extended for miles, broken only by jagged rocks and the skeletal remains of long-dead sea creatures bleached white under a sullen sky. The air smelled wrong, not of salt and brine, but mineral and stagnation, like forgotten pennies in a dusty pocket. I hefted my bags and approached the keeper's quarters. The key lay exactly where the agent said it would be, under a rock shaped curiously like a clenched fist. It turned in the lock with a sound like grinding teeth. Inside, the quarters were Spartan but livable. A small kitchen outfitted with appliances from the 1970s. A sagging couch in the living area, accompanied by a shelf lined with worn paperback novels. A bedroom held a brass bed and a mattress faintly scented with mildew. The bathroom's fixtures were rust-stained and cold to the touch. The silence inside matched the desolation outside. And yet, something about the place felt alive, not with warmth, but with a lingering presence watching, waiting. The darkness pressed in around me, cold and absolute, as the impossible toll echoed across the barren flats. The photographs in the keeper's quarters had been watching silently, but out here, under the vast sky, I felt utterly exposed. Each swing of the buoy bell seemed to carry a mournful message, reverberating through the emptiness like a summons from some forgotten realm. My breath came in ragged gasps, visible in the chill air, and my fingers tightened around the flashlight as if its beam alone could ward off the creeping dread that threatened to root me to the spot. The bell rang again, clear, hollow, relentless, and I knew then that this was no ordinary anomaly. This was something else. Something that had survived beyond reason, beyond nature's laws. The cracked earth beneath my feet seemed to pulse faintly, as if the mudflats themselves breathed with a slow, unnatural rhythm. I swallowed hard and forced myself to take a step back, the crunch of shale sharp in the silence. I turned toward the path leading back to the quarters, but a sudden chill brushed past me, not the wind, but something colder, intangible, like a whisper carried on the breath of the dead. My skin prickled as the shadows shifted at the edge of my vision. I dared not look, yet I felt eyes upon me, watching, waiting. As the lighthouse beacon swept overhead again, it briefly illuminated the distant buoy, its hollow bell swinging silently in the stark white light, a haunting sentinel in a drowned world. I stumbled back toward the safety of the quarters, the weight of the unseen pressing heavy upon my chest. The impossible bell tolled on behind me, echoing in my mind long after I was inside, doors locked tight against the night. There, in the flickering glow of a single lamp, I realized that some things refuse to be forgotten, some voices never cease calling, even from places abandoned and lost. And as the bells tolled through the silence, I understood that my isolation was not a refuge, but a doorway to something far darker still. The night deepened, and though the quarters were small and bare, they felt suffocatingly close, walls seeming to pulse with the echo of that impossible bell. I sat at the window, staring out toward the mudflats where the buoy lay, its hollow bell swinging without reason, tolling a mournful, otherworldly rhythm. Sleep would not come. Every creak of the old building, every groan of shifting stone and settling timbers, became a whisper, a footstep, a voice just beyond hearing. The photographs of previous keepers stared from their frames, stern faces frozen in time, their eyes seeming to hold a silent warning I could no longer ignore. I found myself tracing their lines with a shaking finger, wondering how many had come before me, and what fate had befallen them. The silence was shattered suddenly by a sharp knock on the door. My heart leapt into my throat. I hesitated, breath caught in my chest, before gathering the courage to open. No one was there. Only the whisper of cold wind and the distant tolling of the bell. That night, as I lay on the creaking mattress, the sound came closer. Not just the bell, but something else, faint footsteps crunching over gravel and stone. A slow, deliberate pacing that seemed to circle the building. I pressed my ear to the floor, straining to hear. A voice whispered my name. Or was it the wind? The line blurred. Morning brought no relief. My body ached, and the weight of unseen eyes pressed heavily on my mind. I realized then that Craven Point was not simply a place of isolation, but a crossroads, a place where the past reached through time, clinging to the present. And the bell, that impossible, clapperless bell, was its mournful heartbeat. I had come here to heal. But some wounds, I feared, cut too deep. Days blurred into restless nights as I grappled with the weight of isolation and the relentless tolling of that hollow bell. The impossible ringing echoed through the mudflats and into my dreams, weaving itself into a haunting refrain I could neither escape nor fully comprehend. I began to notice strange occurrences within the keeper's quarters. Objects shifted ever so slightly, a book left open on a different page, a chair subtly moved out of place, footprints in the dust where no one had walked. The air grew thick with an intangible presence, heavy with sorrow and warning. One evening, as the sun dipped beneath the horizon, painting the sky in bruised purples and deep oranges, I ventured once more toward the mudflats, drawn by a mixture of dread and compulsion. The bell tolled in the distance, a spectral metronome marking time in a place where time seemed to have lost meaning. As I approached the buoy, the cold wind whispered through the cracks in the earth, carrying voices just beyond comprehension, fragments of conversation, sighs of regret, echoes of lives long past. The bell continued its mournful song, swinging rhythmically despite the stillness of the air. Then, through the gathering gloom, I caught sight of a figure. At first, a shadow against the fading light, indistinct and wavering like a mirage. Closer now, I could make out the outlines of a woman, her form flickering with the same fragile, wavering glow I had glimpsed in the elevator back home. She stood at the water's vanished edge, eyes fixed on the horizon where sea once met sky. Her voice rose in a fragile lament, words lost to the wind but heavy with grief. I wanted to speak, to ask her who she was, why she lingered in this forsaken place, but my voice failed me. The figure turned, and I saw her face, pale, marked by sorrow and time, eyes hollow yet pleading. In that moment, I understood that the bell was her calling, a beacon not for ships, but for the lost souls tied to this land, tethered to memories of water now gone. She reached out a trembling hand, and the mud beneath her feet shimmered as if alive. The ground cracked softly, revealing fragments of a drowned past, broken vessels, faded photographs, whispered secrets buried beneath layers of silt and salt. I stumbled back, heart pounding, as the air thickened with the weight of history and loss. The lighthouse beacon swept over us once more, its light harsh and unyielding, slicing through the twilight and illuminating the haunted shore. I knew then that Craven Point held its own sorrowful truths, stories of abandonment, despair, and echoes of lives undone by time and tide. And I was caught in the tide's relentless pull, drawn deeper into its haunting depths. The darkness around me thickened like a living thing, swallowing the weak circle of light from my trembling flashlight. Each step onto the cracked mud sent a jolt of revulsion through me, the crust breaking to reveal a slick, viscous liquid that shimmered with an oily rainbow sheen. The smell hit me in waves, copper, rot, and something indescribably foul that made every hair on my neck stand rigid. I was barely 10 yards from the shore when the lighthouse beam swept over me again. In that brief flash, my heart nearly stopped. My shadow stretched long across the cracked earth, but it was not alone. Beside it stood the small silhouette of a child, round-headed and oddly disproportionate, the shadow hands covering a tiny, weeping face. It moved with me, sorrowful and silent. The light passed, and I whipped around, my breath ragged, my flashlight darting wildly through the darkness. But there was nothing. No child. No shape. Only the heavy silence and the sickening smell rising from the broken earth. Then, louder than before, the buoy bell tolled, a hollow, impossible sound, ringing out in a place where no water flowed. Other sounds joined it, soft, wet squelching from beneath the mud, and distant sobbing carried on the still air. Panic surged, and I turned to flee, stumbling and slipping on loose shale as the lighthouse beam caught me in its cold, sweeping gaze. Every rotation revealed that weeping shadow keeping pace with me, though I ran alone. I burst through the keeper's quarters door, slamming it shut and throwing the deadbolt with shaking hands. My chest heaved as sobs threatened to break free, sweat chilling against my skin despite the cold. Through the window, the mudflats lay bathed in brief white light, dark humps dotting the barren plain, shifting closer with each sweep of the beacon. They moved. They crept. They advanced. I tore myself away and grabbed my phone, the screen flickering with a single, weak bar. Hands trembling, I dialed the rental agent. "Hello." His voice sounded distant, hollow. "The lighthouse," I gasped, "something's wrong. The ocean, it's gone. The tide, it's not just out." He cut me off, voice flat, rehearsed. "We don't talk about what people see at Craven Point." "What do you mean?" I demanded, voice rising. "The tide goes out. It always comes back. Sometimes it takes things. Sometimes it brings things. But it always returns." "What things?" I pressed. A long pause. "They're not supposed to be here when the water's gone. They're supposed to stay deep down. But sometimes, they get confused. They hear the bell and think it's time." "Time for what?" I shouted. Only static answered. I sank onto the sagging couch, heart hammering wildly. Outside, the lighthouse's beam swept relentlessly, casting harsh light before plunging the room back into darkness. The bell tolled, steady, impossible. Then, the wet sound started. Soft squelching footsteps on the porch. A gentle thump on the door. The scrape of something dragged across the boards. I held my breath as the light turned again, and I saw it. Seawater seeped beneath the door, pooling on the floor, spreading wide. The cold water spread quickly across the floor, slick and viscous, carrying with it a faint, briny tang that seemed impossibly out of place here, so far from the sea's grasp. It oozed under the edges of the door and pooled like a living thing, dark and hungry. My heart hammered so loudly I was certain it would burst through my ribs. Every instinct screamed at me to flee, to find sanctuary somewhere, anywhere, but I was rooted to the spot, trapped by a fascination mingled with raw, gnawing fear. The soft squelching footsteps resumed, slow and deliberate, circling the perimeter of the building. They carried a wet, dragging sound, like something heavy being pulled unwillingly over the wooden porch. A low whisper rose with the tide of water at my feet, an ancient, mournful chant, unintelligible yet laden with grief and warning. I forced myself to inch toward the door, every step a battle against the paralysis gripping me. Peering beneath the doorframe, the dark water swirled, thickening, reflecting the weak glow of my dying flashlight. Then the door handle rattled, slow and heavy, as if pushed by unseen hands, strained and deliberate. I stepped back, heart pounding, the room's shadows closing in. The handle turned, fractionally, agonizingly slow, as if whatever was outside was weighing its options. A sharp, wet breath brushed my cheek, icy cold and smelling of salt and decay. Then silence. My eyes strained in the dim light, searching for movement beyond the threshold. The water's surface rippled. And in that moment, a faint shape emerged, something dark and twisted, half submerged, with eyes that gleamed faintly like drowned stars. It lurched forward, dragging itself onto the porch with agonized slowness, tendrils of seaweed-like hair trailing behind. Its gaze locked with mine, empty yet yearning. The impossible bell tolled once more, louder and more insistent. I stumbled back, knocking over a chair, heart racing. The creature advanced, the water rising around it, swallowing the floorboards as the porch seemed to flood with the sea's lost memories. I reached for the old brass lantern hanging by the door, flinging it into the dark shape. It shattered with a wet crash, scattering light and shadows. The thing recoiled, shrieking, a sound like wind through dead bones. Then it vanished into the spreading water. The tide receded as quickly as it had come, leaving behind a damp chill and the lingering scent of brine and sorrow. But I knew, it was not truly gone. The bell would toll again. And so would it. The night had thickened into something viscous, as though the very air around me conspired with the creeping tide that had invaded my sanctuary. The remnants of the shattered lantern's glow flickered weakly, casting dancing shadows that seemed to twist into anguished forms along the walls. I stood frozen, breath caught somewhere between terror and disbelief, the echo of that guttural shriek ringing relentlessly in my ears. Outside, the tide receded as abruptly as it had surged, swallowing the apparition back into the desolate mudflats, leaving behind nothing but a chilling dampness and the faintest trace of salt on the floorboards. But in the hollow of my chest, a grim certainty settled. This was no fleeting nightmare. It was a visitation, a summons, and perhaps a warning. The buoy bell tolled again, its hollow clang reverberating through the stillness like a death knell. I wrapped trembling hands around a blanket and retreated to the far corner of the quarters, where the photographs of past keepers loomed in silence, their eyes heavy with untold stories and unspoken sorrow. Compelled by a restless dread, I turned to the worn ledger on the rickety desk, pages yellowed and fragile. The entries were cryptic, lines of ink smudged with time and neglect, but among them, a recurring name surfaced, penned in desperate haste, Margaret. Who was Margaret? Why did her name appear over and over in these faded records? The unanswered questions clawed at me, but sleep offered no reprieve. Instead, dreams of drowning and despair haunted the shadows behind my closed eyelids. In the bleak hours before dawn, I resolved to seek answers, not just in these crumbling pages, but beyond the walls of the keeper's quarters. For something ancient and sorrowful had awoken here, and it was bound to the land, to the lost sea, and to the mournful tolling of that clapperless bell. The isolation I had sought for healing was instead a descent into a history steeped in loss, haunting, and a silence that screamed beneath the waves long vanished. As dawn's pale light filtered through the cracked windows, I sat hunched over the fragile ledger, tracing the hurried entries with trembling fingers. The name Margaret appeared repeatedly, scrawled beside dates marked with ominous annotations: disappearance, investigation, unresolved. Determined, I turned to the few tattered volumes in the keeper's quarters shelf, old newspapers, brittle and yellowed, recounting stories long buried beneath the salt and sand. The name Margaret Halloran surfaced time and again, a lighthouse keeper's assistant in the early 1920s, a woman known for her fierce dedication and unwavering resolve. But the records grew fragmented, filled with whispers of tension, disputes with the head keeper, sudden disappearances of supplies, rumors of strange lights on the mudflats. Then came the final, chilling account: Margaret vanished one stormy night, swallowed by a fierce tempest while trying to save a stranded ship's crew. No body was ever found. The community whispered that the sea had claimed her, but the lighthouse log hinted at darker truths, entries describing eerie bell tolls heard before the storm, shadowy figures lurking in the fog, and unexplained disturbances at the lighthouse. Some claimed Margaret had uncovered something forbidden, a secret buried beneath the mudflats, a debt unpaid by those who controlled the land and sea. The legend grew, that Margaret's spirit remained tethered to Craven Point, bound by unfinished business and the mournful tolling of the bell, calling for justice, for reckoning. As I pieced together her story, the veil between past and present thinned. I realized that the impossible bell, the weeping shadow, the creeping tide, they were all echoes of Margaret's unresolved fate, reverberations of a tragedy that refused to rest. The lighthouse was no longer just a beacon for ships lost at sea, it was a monument to sorrow, a sentinel over secrets better left forgotten. The darkness in the room seemed to thicken, suffocating, as that viscous, unnatural liquid crept ever outward, swallowing the floor beneath my trembling feet. It wasn't water, not truly. It was heavier, darker, thick with an oily sheen that caught the harsh white glare of the lighthouse beam and fractured it into haunting rainbows that danced and writhed like living things. I froze when the second thump hit the door, harder this time, sending a shudder through the deadbolt, rattling it in its cold metal housing. The pool of that strange liquid rippled in response as if the very floor itself was breathing. My breath hitched. I scrambled backward, pressing myself into the farthest corner, powerless, unable even to scream. All I could do was watch in paralyzed terror as the door buckled, darkening where the liquid seeped beneath it, the wood warping and groaning in protest. Then, silence. A silence so absolute and thick that it crushed the very air from my lungs, a waiting silence that felt alive, patient, hunting. I strained to listen, but the only sound was the ragged rhythm of my own breath and the distant, impossibly steady toll of the buoy bell. The lighthouse beam swept across the room again, and there it was. A shadow cast upon the wall, not mine, crouched trembling where I hid, but another. Small, rounded, unmistakably the silhouette of an infant. It sat in the middle of the room, though nothing was there to cast it. Frozen, I watched as the shadow raised its tiny hands to its face, as if weeping. The bell tolled once more. The shadow flinched at the sound, turning its head slowly toward me. It had no eyes, no face, just a hollow shape filled with darkness, yet somehow I felt its gaze pierce me. I recalled my therapist's words, that in moments of extreme stress, the mind fractures, inventing visions to shield itself from unbearable truths. That hallucinations, paranoia, dissociation were the psyche's desperate attempts at self-protection. But this was not protection. It felt like my sanity unraveling, layer by agonizing layer, exposing something raw and terrified lurking beneath. The shadow began to crawl, slow and deliberate, across the wall toward me, defying all laws of reality. As the lighthouse beam swept past, plunging the room back into darkness, I felt it drawing ever closer, a cold pressure filling the air, a presence heavy with intent. Desperate, I fumbled for my phone, flicked on the flashlight, and flooded the room with harsh, unnatural light. The shadow did not disappear. It clung to the walls and floor, creeping nearer, inch by inch. My back pressed against the corner, no escape left. It paused mere inches from me. In the haunting silence, beneath the steady toll of the bell, I heard a soft, wet breathing, synchronized with the shadow's movements, not from it, but somehow bound to it, as if they were parts of a greater whole, a creature lurking just out of sight. The bell tolled again. The atmosphere shifted, pressure eased, and the shadow shuddered, head cocked as if listening. When the bell rang once more, the shadow began to fade, growing translucent until the wall behind was visible through it. Through the window, I saw movement on the mudflats. The distant dark humps I had glimpsed earlier were retreating, dragging themselves away toward the horizon as if called home by the dying tide. The bell's toll grew faint, less frequent. I did not move until dawn. My muscles locked, body stiff with cold and terror. The first pale rays revealed the keeper's quarters as unchanged as the day I arrived, no water seepage, no warped door, no sign of the night's horrors beyond the pounding of my heart when I remember. Outside, the mudflat stretched endlessly, silent and empty. The buoy lay rusted and still, its bell hanging lifeless. No shape stirred in the cracked earth. No water returned. I packed my bags with trembling hands. As I loaded them into the car, the rental agent's voice echoed through my mind. The tide goes out. Sometimes it takes things with it. Sometimes it brings things back. The dawn light spilled pale and cold over the endless mudflats as I closed the car door behind me, the weight of what I'd witnessed pressing heavily on my chest. Every rational thought clamored to explain what I had seen, the impossible bell, the crawling shadow, the thick black water that moved with a life of its own, but none could quell the raw, unshakable dread that clung to me like a second skin. As I drove away from Craven Point, the lighthouse shrinking behind me into a ghostly silhouette against the brightening sky, I couldn't stop hearing that spectral toll, the bell that echoed through my mind like a mournful summons. The rental agent's words rang true in a way I hadn't understood before. The tide goes out. Sometimes it takes things with it. Sometimes it brings things back. But what was it that had been taken? And what had been brought back? Back in the city, I began to dig deeper. Old maritime records, town archives, even whispered legends told by weathered fishermen and aged locals. I learned that Craven Point had once been a bustling port, a place of life and trade, until the tides mysteriously receded almost overnight nearly a century ago, swallowing ships and livelihoods alike. The sea had vanished, but it hadn't forgotten. Margaret Halloran's name surfaced repeatedly in the shadows of these stories, a keeper whose life ended too soon, caught between duty and a terrible secret. Some claimed she had tried to halt a curse, to seal the restless souls trapped in the vanishing waters. And the bell? It was said to be the signal, a warning and a lament, tolling for the lost, calling the forgotten to return, to find peace or to claim new souls to share their fate. I realized then that Craven Point was not just haunted by memories, but by unresolved grief and vengeance, by the very tides of time and loss. And the bell would toll on, until the debt was paid. The voices wove through the pine and shadow like threads of an ancient tapestry, each note hauntingly pure, resonating beneath the canopy in a way that defied explanation. I stood motionless, heart pounding, radio silent at my hip, the forest around me eerily still as if holding its breath. The temperature had dropped sharply, but the chill that settled over me had nothing to do with the crisp October air. It was the presence of something otherworldly, cold and indifferent. My name is Daniel Merrick, Senior Ranger at Mount Baker Snoqualmie National Forest. In my 17 years patrolling these woods, I'd faced lost hikers, aggressive bears, even illicit drug operations hidden deep in the backcountry, but nothing had prepared me for this. For weeks, strange reports had filtered in. Hikers claiming to hear church music near Desolation Peak. A geology student capturing recordings of monks chanting while collecting samples near Alpine Creek. Backpackers cutting their trips short after hearing Latin chants by their campsites on consecutive nights. Different places, separate witnesses, all describing the same impossible phenomenon, perfect Gregorian chants echoing through the dense forest, yet with no discernible source. Forest management dismissed the claims as either enthusiasts camping nearby or religious retreats. But when 5 separate reports arrived over a single weekend, I volunteered to investigate. My personal life was in turmoil, my sister's sudden illness, the impending dissolution of my marriage, sleepless nights filled with restless dreams. The forest had always been my sanctuary, a place of clarity and peace. I welcomed the distraction. Mapping the reports revealed a rough circle about 3 miles across, containing most of the incidents. I packed overnight gear but planned to return before darkness. The terrain was mostly second-growth forest, well-maintained trails, relatively easy going. How wrong I was. The singing began when I was cataloging tracks near a dried stream bed. Faint at first, barely audible beneath the rustling wind and distant woodpeckers, it grew gradually louder. Male voices rose and fell in flawless medieval harmony, the words Latin, untranslatable yet unmistakable, filling the woods with an eerie, resonant beauty. The sound seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, enveloping me, unsettling yet captivating. Drawn forward, I followed the chanting up a narrow deer path winding between lichen-covered rocks and fallen nurse logs. The forest seemed to close around me, the shadows deepening as the voices swelled. The deer path twisted deeper into the forest's embrace, narrowing as towering firs and cedars pressed close, their needles whispering secrets in the cool autumn air. The Gregorian chants grew louder, yet still ethereal, an impossible soundscape threading through the branches, coming from no discernible direction yet everywhere at once. It was as if the forest itself sang, ancient and mournful. The ground beneath my boots shifted from packed earth to soft moss and fallen needles. The air thickened, carrying a faint scent of incense and damp stone, incongruous here among pine and fern. Every instinct screamed caution, but the pull of the voices was magnetic, driving me onward. Ahead, the path opened into a small clearing bathed in twilight. Here, the chanting coalesced, rich, layered voices weaving a tapestry of sound that seemed both sacred and sorrowful. In the center stood an ancient stone altar, overgrown with moss and ivy, its surface etched with faded runes and symbols worn smooth by time. I approached cautiously, heart pounding. The air hummed with a palpable energy, charged by centuries of devotion and forgotten rites. The altar's presence felt heavy, as though bearing the weight of countless souls who had gathered here long ago. Suddenly, the singing ceased. The silence fell like a shroud, thick and suffocating. I spun around, searching the shadows, but saw nothing, only the dense forest watching silently. A whisper brushed past my ear, a voice, ancient and mournful, uttering a single Latin phrase, "Venite ad me omnes," come to me, all. I swallowed hard, feeling the pull of unseen eyes. Then, from the underbrush, a figure stepped forward, a man clad in tattered robes, his face pale and worn, eyes deep pools of sorrow. His lips moved in silent prayer, yet the sound lingered in the clearing as if carried on the wind itself. He raised a hand, palm outward, beckoning. I hesitated, torn between fear and an inexplicable trust. The forest seemed to hold its breath. As I stepped closer, the air grew colder, shadows lengthened, and I sensed I had crossed a threshold, into a place where time folded, and the past bled into the present. The man's eyes met mine, deep wells of sorrow and knowledge, reflecting centuries of pain and devotion. He was both here and not here, a spectral guardian bound to this sacred clearing. His voice, when it finally broke the silence, was a low chant, a prayer lost to time but vibrating with raw power. "Here lies the burden of the forgotten," he intoned. "The souls who sought refuge in these woods, only to be claimed by shadows darker than night." I felt the weight of his words settle over me like a shroud. The altar before us was no mere relic, it was a threshold, a vessel for memories and curses, a place where the living and dead intertwined. He spoke of Margaret Halloran, keeper of Craven Point, lost to the sea but bound still by duty and sorrow. Her spirit, he said, was tethered not just to the lighthouse but to the earth itself, to the pain and betrayal buried beneath the tides. The chants, the bell, the shadows, they were echoes of her struggle, of debts unpaid and promises broken. As he spoke, the forest around us seemed to shift, trees bending, shadows lengthening, as if the land itself was alive, mourning, waiting. I realized then that I was no longer a mere observer. I was part of this ancient tale, drawn into a story where the boundary between past and present, between the seen and unseen, had dissolved. The path back was no longer certain, and the forest whispered secrets that would haunt me long after I left its depths. The distorted chanting wove through the trees like a broken incantation, fragments of familiar Latin phrases slipping in and out of comprehension, as if the voices themselves were struggling to remember an ancient rite long forgotten. The sound was both mesmerizing and disorienting, tugging at the edges of my mind with a force I could neither resist nor fully understand. Each step forward felt heavier, as though the very air thickened around me, pressing against my skin and seeping into my lungs. The path beneath my feet grew narrower, flanked by gnarled roots and twisted underbrush that seemed to claw at my boots, attempting to hold me back. Shadows lengthened unnaturally, and the forest's usual chorus of night sounds faded into a suffocating silence, broken only by the warped chanting that pulsed like a heartbeat. Suddenly, the trail opened into a small clearing bathed in an eerie, pale light that seemed to emanate from nowhere. In the center stood a stone circle, weathered and covered with moss, its rough-hewn pillars etched with symbols that pulsed faintly with a spectral glow. The air here was charged with a palpable tension, a crossroads of something ancient and forbidden. As I stepped into the circle, the chanting ceased abruptly, leaving an oppressive quiet that swallowed all sound. My breath caught, and the hairs on my arms stood on end. Then, a voice whispered directly into my mind, not spoken aloud, but felt, like a cold breath against my very soul. "You have come," it said, "to witness what should remain unseen." I spun, searching the shadows for the source, but found only darkness and the faint shimmer of the fading light. Then, slowly, figures began to materialize around the circle, translucent shapes clad in monastic robes, their faces obscured but their presence unmistakably solemn and sorrowful. They began to chant once more, their voices blending into a mournful harmony that resonated deep within me, stirring memories I never knew I had. I realized then that I stood on sacred ground, a place where time bent and the veil between worlds thinned. The spirits of those bound by ancient oaths and tragic fate gathered here, caught in an eternal cycle of penance and remembrance. The distorted chanting was no longer merely sound, it was a summons, a call to join the silent vigil or to turn away and carry the weight of knowledge alone. My heart thundered in my chest as the circle's glow intensified, and I knew that whatever path I chose next would change everything. The spectral choir's voices swelled, filling the clearing with an otherworldly resonance that seemed to vibrate through my bones. Each note, steeped in sorrow and ancient reverence, tugged at a hidden part of me, as if awakening memories not my own. The air grew thick, charged with a presence both overwhelming and intimate, pressing upon me with the weight of countless lost souls. The translucent figures surrounding the circle turned slowly, their gaze unseen yet piercing. The chanting slowed, morphing into a solemn dirge that echoed the unending burden they bore. From the center of the stone circle, a faint pulse of light radiated outward, illuminating the cryptic runes carved deep into the weathered pillars. A voice, neither fully human nor entirely spectral, rose above the chant, clear and commanding in my mind. "You have come seeking truths buried beneath shadow and time. Know this, the curse that binds this place was born from a broken covenant, a debt unpaid, and a promise shattered." Visions flooded my mind, of a distant era when men and spirits walked uneasy paths together, of a pact forged in desperation beneath a blood-red sky, of betrayal and sorrow that echoed through generations. I saw Margaret, her face youthful and determined, standing defiant against unseen forces, her hands reaching toward the restless sea. The bell tolled as she fought to protect both the living and the dead, to seal away the darkness rising from the depths. But the pact had failed. Her spirit, bound to both the earth and the water, remained trapped in an eternal vigil. The bell's impossible tolling was a reminder and a warning, the tide of fate ever turning, the debt demanding reckoning. The spectral congregation's voices softened into whispers, their figures dissolving like mist at dawn, leaving me alone in the silent clearing. The forest breathed around me, the normal chorus of night sounds returning, yet I felt forever changed, marked by knowledge that both burdened and freed me. As I turned back toward the trailhead, the sky above was dark and star-studded, the chill air carrying a faint, distant bell toll, echoing the call that would never cease. The ecclesiastical melody lingered in the air, but beneath its sacred harmony rippled dissonant undertones that sent shivers crawling up my arms. I fumbled with my recorder again, fingers trembling uncontrollably as I pressed the record button. For nearly a minute, the chanting remained steady, an eerie comfort in its consistency. Perhaps, I thought, the earlier strange phenomena were nothing more than hallucinations born of exhaustion. Then, suddenly, my own voice emerged, clear and commanding amidst the chorus. It narrated in unsettling detail the path ahead, the ravine's sharp turn, the narrow log crossing slick with moss, and the cave entrance visible only from a precise angle. It foretold my compulsion to enter despite instinctive warnings, describing how my headlamp would falter 100 feet in, replaced by a faint, ghostly green glow deep within. Heart pounding, I stopped the recording and immediately played it back. But all that met my ears was the hollow hiss of static, no chanting, no voice, no evidence of what I just heard. Raising my headlamp, I found the ravine exactly as described. The log bridge stretched before me, slick and inviting. My hands shook uncontrollably as I fumbled for my radio, desperate for connection. Only static answered, deep, empty, unyielding. I cycled through channels, tried the satellite phone, each call dropped before connection. Alone, trapped in the wilderness with voices narrating my every move, my rational mind screamed to turn back, but my body obeyed some unseen command. Crossing the log bridge, my boots slipped on the damp wood. The ravine walls closed in, a natural channel pulling me deeper. The cave entrance appeared as predicted, a dark scar in the stone, faint moss framing the threshold. Despite every survival instinct screaming warning, I ducked beneath the low opening, the beam of my headlamp piercing the darkness. Inside, thin rivulets of water traced mineral-streaked walls, the air cool and heavy. The chanting surrounded me now, emanating not from a source but seeming embedded in the stone itself, voices rising and falling in sync with my heartbeat and breath. At 100 feet in, my headlamp flickered, then settled into a weak, trembling glow. Ahead, faint green luminescence traced the chamber's contours. My body disconnected from my will, terror flooding every nerve, racing heart, constricted breathing, clammy skin, but still I pressed forward. The chamber widened, revealing shifting symbols etched into walls that seemed to warp as I looked directly. At the center stood a crude stone pedestal. Atop it rested an ancient recording device, neither wholly wood nor metal but a strange hybrid. A cylindrical component slowly turned, a needle tracing its surface. The chanting rose to a crescendo, a complex harmony pressing like a physical force against my skin. Then silence, a blade slicing through the noise. In the void, the device emitted a voice, my voice, but aged, worn thin by time and trauma. It spoke not of what I would do but what I had done. Of discovering this device, my initial terror, and gradual comprehension. It told of cycles, time folding back upon itself. Of repeated returns to these caves in years yet to come. Of bringing others into the fold. Of becoming both observer and participant in a timeless, unfathomable mystery beyond human reckoning. The aged voice continued, each word weighted with a gravity that seemed to press against the very walls of the chamber. It spoke of endless loops, days folding into nights, years unraveling and rewinding, and souls caught in the endless recurrence of moments both past and future. It told of a haunting compulsion, a force that drew me here, again and again, like a moth to a flame that burned beyond time. I staggered back, heart pounding as the recording's final words faded into silence. The green light dimmed, and the chamber's walls ceased their shifting dance of symbols. For a moment, I was alone, save for the echo of my own breath and the distant tolling of a bell far beyond this forgotten place. A cold realization settled over me, I was trapped within a cycle not entirely of my own making. The past and future intertwined, weaving a tapestry of fate that ensnared not only me but those who had come before, and those yet to come. As I turned to leave, the cave's shadows stretched long, and the faintest whisper brushed my ear, a voice both distant and intimate, the cycle must be broken, but the price is great. The path back through the ravine felt heavier, the air thick with the weight of unseen eyes. The chanting had ceased, replaced by a profound silence that pressed upon my chest like a physical force. Emerging from the cave, the forest greeted me not with relief, but with a chilling stillness. The stars above shimmered cold and distant, and the faint bell toll echoed across the darkened wilderness, an eternal summons that neither time nor distance could silence. I knew then that my journey had only begun, and that to break the cycle, I would have to face truths deeper and darker than any forest shadow, and pay a price beyond reckoning. The buzzing began as a faint vibration under my fingertips, subtle and easily dismissed. But over the days, it grew, an insistent hum threading through the steel, a whisper of electricity that seemed to seep from the very metal I worked on. At first, I thought it was nothing more than the workshop's old wiring or the radio's interference. Yet the sound was too precise, too deliberate, as if the cars themselves were trying to speak. My grandfather's words echoed in my mind, "Metal remembers." For years, I thought it was just an old man's superstition, a poetic way of honoring the machines he loved. But now, the truth was undeniable. The steel remembered every scrape, every dent, every loving touch. It held memory in its cold veins. One night, while polishing the Mustang's gleaming hood, the buzzing crescendoed into a piercing drone. The radio faltered, the voices of Led Zeppelin warped and stretched into a haunting melody. My hands stilled, the buffer clutched tightly, as the metal seemed to shudder beneath my touch. Then I saw it, reflections in the chrome that weren't my own. Flickering images of past lives, of hands not mine working the same steel decades before. Faces blurred in the paint's depth, shadows of accidents, triumphs, and tragedies frozen in time. The workshop felt alive, the air thick with the weight of history and untold stories etched into every rivet and seam. I realized then that my work was more than restoration, it was awakening memories long buried, memories that yearned to be heard. The buzzing was a call, a message from the past reaching out through the metal, demanding attention. And I was the only one who could listen. The night deepened, shadows stretching across the worn wooden floorboards of my workshop as the buzzing grew louder, more insistent. It wasn't just a sound, it was a vibration that hummed through the tools, the workbenches, the very metal I touched. The Mustang's chrome seemed to pulse, reflecting flickers of light that didn't belong to any lamp in the room. I set the buffer down, heart pounding, and watched as the reflections twisted and shifted, faces from another time, hands gripping steering wheels, engines roaring, moments of triumph and disaster caught in the polished steel. One image lingered, a man, young and resolute, standing beside a gleaming car that looked strangely familiar, his eyes burning with a fierce intensity. I reached out to touch the hood, and a shock pulsed through my fingertips, not electric, but something deeper, as if the metal itself was alive, trying to communicate. The buzzing morphed into whispers, snatches of voices, laughter, arguments, echoes trapped in the steel's memory. Suddenly, the workshop door creaked open, though I hadn't moved. A cold draft swept through, carrying the scent of oil and burnt rubber mixed with something else, old leather, faded memories, and something darker beneath it. I spun around, but the room was empty save for the cars and the lingering shadows. The radio crackled to life, the classic rock replaced by a distant, distorted voice speaking in a language I couldn't understand, words woven with urgency and warning. I knew then that my grandfather's words were true. The metal remembers. And it was trying to tell me something. The buzzing didn't stop. Day after day, it threaded through every moment I spent in the workshop, weaving itself into my thoughts until it became impossible to ignore. The reflections in the chrome grew sharper, more insistent, faces staring back at me with accusing eyes, images of accidents and betrayals playing out like fragmented memories I could neither place nor forget. Sleep became a distant memory. Nights stretched long and restless, haunted by dreams where I was both mechanic and ghost, working on cars that morphed into twisted metal nightmares. The workshop morphed from sanctuary to prison, walls closing in, tools gleaming with sinister intent. I found myself talking to the cars, whispering apologies and pleading for forgiveness, as if the steel held my soul captive. Friends noticed my withdrawal, the wild look in my eyes, the frantic scribbles I made in notebooks filled with sketches of parts and cryptic symbols. Reality began to fracture. I'd catch glimpses of movement out of the corner of my eye, shadows slipping between vehicles, whispers echoing in empty rooms. The line between memory and hallucination blurred until I couldn't tell where I ended and the metal's history began. Every polished surface became a mirror reflecting not just my face but the faces of those who'd come before, trapped in the cold embrace of steel and time. The buzzing became a chorus, a relentless song driving me deeper into obsession. I knew I was losing myself, spiraling into a world where metal remembered everything, and demanded I remember, too. The engine's roar filled the workshop like a beast unleashed from a deep slumber. My breath caught in my throat as the Mustang's headlights blazed brighter, flooding the dim space with unforgiving light. The sound vibrated through the metal frames, the walls, even the floor beneath my feet. I was paralyzed, unable to tear my eyes away from the impossible spectacle. The air grew heavy, thick with an electric charge that made the hairs on my arms stand on end. The tools rattling in their drawers now sounded like dry, mocking laughter echoing from unseen corners. My heart hammered relentlessly, pounding a frantic rhythm in my chest. The radio crackled, static splintering into fractured voices and distant music snippets, like ghostly transmissions from another time or place. Then the dials settled on white noise, a low, unearthly moan that seemed to seep from the walls themselves. I fumbled for my phone, but my trembling fingers betrayed me. It slipped and shattered on the unforgiving concrete. When I picked it up, the screen was dead, completely unresponsive, as if drained of life. And then the car's engine turned over, smooth and unyielding. It idled perfectly, alive without fuel or driver. My knees buckled, and I staggered backward until I collided with the cold steel of the tool chest. The headlights tracked my every movement, relentless and merciless. I realized then that my grandfather's words weren't just superstition. Metal remembers. And whatever was awakening in the shop was remembering me. The origins of the mysterious force trapped within the metal were buried deep in the annals of my family's history, tales whispered late at night by my grandfather, stories I had once dismissed as mere folklore. But now, with the workshop alive in a way I could no longer deny, those old tales took on a chilling new meaning. Decades ago, during the golden age of American automotive craftsmanship, my great-grandfather had been more than a mechanic. He was an inventor and a tinkerer who dabbled in the arcane, blending science and superstition. Legend said he had discovered a way to bind memory, emotion, and even fragments of the soul to metal itself, a technique inspired by ancient alchemical texts and secret societies. His creations were said to possess a life of their own, vessels for the echoes of those who had touched them, imbued with the triumphs and tragedies of their owners. But such power came with a price. Some machines were cursed, holding not just memories but anger, pain, and vengeance that transcended time. One such machine was the very Mustang I was restoring, a car that had once belonged to a man whose life ended in a mysterious accident, one whispered to have been fueled by jealousy and betrayal. It was said that the man's spirit lingered, trapped within the steel, waiting for the right moment, or the right person, to awaken it. Now, I realized, I had become the custodian of these restless memories. The metal's buzzing was more than a vibration, it was a call, a plea for acknowledgement, for understanding, and perhaps for redemption. The workshop was no longer just a place of work. It was a crossroads where past and present collided, where the echoes of my ancestors and their secrets whispered through the chrome and steel, demanding that I listen, and that I act. The workshop seemed to hold its breath as the question hung in the freezing air, the soft hum of the engine echoing like a heartbeat beneath my trembling hands. The steering wheel pulsed faintly, a rhythmic vibration that seemed to sync with my own ragged breath. Then, the radio crackled sharply, breaking the silence. The static resolved into that distant, distorted voice once more, quiet, almost intimate, yet carrying an edge that sent shivers down my spine. You know why? The words repeated, each iteration more insistent, like a ghostly refrain from the past refusing to be silenced. I closed my eyes, memories flooding back, those chaotic seconds in the car, the crash, my grandfather's protective sacrifice. The weight of guilt I had carried for years, buried deep beneath layers of denial and hard work. The headlights flickered, casting long shadows that danced across the walls like restless spirits. I felt tears freeze on my cheeks, the cold mingling with a profound ache in my chest. I'm sorry, I whispered again, voice cracking under the weight of decades. I never wanted any of this. A soft, warm chuckle, faint but unmistakable, washed over the workshop. It was him, my grandfather. Not a ghost of menace, but a presence of forgiveness and enduring love. The engine's roar softened, settling into a gentle hum as if accepting my words. Summoning every ounce of courage, I slid fully into the driver's seat. The leather was ice cold, but I gripped the wheel, its pulse steady beneath my fingers. What do you want from me? I asked again, barely louder than a breath. The workshop seemed to lean in, waiting. The engine idled in response, a slow, measured cadence that felt almost like a heartbeat syncing with my own. Then, in the stillness, I understood. This was more than a machine. It was a vessel of memory and redemption. A bridge between past mistakes and a chance for healing. And the journey I thought was mine alone was far more intertwined than I ever imagined. The warmth of the engine's steady pulse beneath my fingertips was strangely comforting, a tether to something beyond the cold metal and shattered memories. The workshop faded away, replaced by the vivid fragments of a past I had tried so hard to bury, moments of laughter, of lessons passed from grandfather to grandson, and then that terrible night when everything changed. I closed my eyes, letting the memories wash over me, until a new clarity emerged. This was no mere machine. The car was a keeper of stories, a guardian of the unspoken, and now, somehow, it was calling me to face the parts of myself I'd long avoided. The next days blurred into a strange rhythm of restoration and reflection. Each bolt I tightened, each panel I polished, was infused with a newfound reverence, not just for the metal, but for the life it represented. I found myself talking aloud, sharing pieces of my history with the car, seeking forgiveness in whispered confessions. Yet, with every step forward, the shadows deepened. Strange sounds echoed in the quiet hours, metallic whispers, the soft scrape of tools moving on their own, the hum of the engine when it should have been silent. Nights were restless, filled with dreams where past and present collided in vivid, often terrifying scenes. Friends and family grew concerned, their voices distant warnings against the obsession consuming me. But I was tethered, bound not only to the car but to the legacy it carried, a legacy that demanded reckoning. One evening, as twilight bled into night, the workshop door creaked open, though I was alone. A chill swept in, carrying the faint scent of oil and old leather, and a voice, my grandfather's voice, echoed softly through the room. Remember, metal remembers. But it also forgives. The road ahead was uncertain, the path to peace tangled with the memories and mysteries etched deep into the steel. But for the first time in years, I felt a flicker of hope, a chance to heal not just the car, but myself. The silhouette lingered just beyond the glass, a dark outline blurred by the swirling steam. My heart slammed against my ribs as if trying to escape its cage. Every rational thought fled, replaced by a primal fear that rooted me to the spot. I blinked, willing the shape to vanish, but it remained, steady and silent, a shadow suspended between worlds. The bathroom's familiar warmth felt distant now, replaced by a creeping chill that slithered up my spine. My breath came out in shallow, uneven gasps, fogging the glass between us. The silence was thick, oppressive, broken only by the steady drip of water from the showerhead. I wanted to scream, to run, but my limbs refused to obey. The smiley face I traced moments ago seemed cruelly out of place, an innocent mark swallowed by the encroaching darkness. Then, slowly, almost imperceptibly, the silhouette shifted. It raised a hand, pressed it against the glass, and for a heartbeat, I swore I saw eyes, empty, dark pools, meeting mine. A whisper, barely audible over the water's patter, brushed my ear. Remember me. The word sent a shock through my body, freezing every muscle in place. I swallowed hard, choking on a lump of terror and disbelief. The figure faded as the steam thickened again, leaving only the faintest trace of cold against the glass. I staggered out of the shower, wrapping myself in a towel, hands shaking uncontrollably. The apartment felt alien, every shadow suddenly alive with unseen presence. My mind raced, searching for answers. Was I losing grip on reality, or was something far darker reaching out from beyond? The silhouette's whispered plea, "Remember me," echoed in my mind long after the glass had fogged over again, swallowing the apparition in its misty veil. Sleep fled me that night, replaced by a restless wakefulness where every creak of the building, every flicker of shadow, seemed charged with unseen meaning. Days passed, but the bathroom's haunted memory lingered like a stain. I found myself drawn back there, compelled to stare into the misted glass, hoping for answers or perhaps a sign. My fingers traced the cold, wet surface, searching for the vanished shape, but found only my own distorted reflection, a stranger with haunted eyes. The nights grew heavier, weighed down by dreams where steam turned to smoke, and the silhouette emerged fully, a figure cloaked in sorrow, reaching through time and glass. In those dreams, she spoke again, not in words, but in feelings, loss, regret, a desperate longing to be remembered. I began digging into the apartment's history, scouring archives and property records. I learned that decades ago, a woman had lived here, a tenant who vanished without explanation. Rumors whispered of heartbreak and tragedy, of a life cut short and forgotten. Her name was Eleanor. The connection felt undeniable. Eleanor's story became my obsession. Her presence a thread weaving through my life, pulling me toward truths buried beneath years of silence. The apartment was no longer just my home. It was a threshold, a fragile barrier between past and present, between the living and the lost. And I was caught in the crossing. The room seemed to close in around me, the cold air biting at my skin as the fogged mirror continued to transform. The crude stick figures, so simple, yet so impossibly alive, danced slowly across the glass, their movements deliberate, eerily synchronized as if mirroring some unseen choreography. One raised its arm, the other followed, a silent communication unfolding in the mist. My breath caught in my throat, heart pounding so fiercely I feared it might shatter my ribs. I wanted to scream, to flee, but my feet were rooted to the cold tile floor, trapped between terror and fascination. Desperately, I reached out a trembling hand toward the mirror, fingers brushing the cold glass just beside the stick figures. The condensation felt unnervingly warm beneath my fingertips, like the breath of something living pressed against the other side. A whisper rose from the silence, so faint I thought I might have imagined it, a voice soft and urgent, threading through the stillness, "Remember." I staggered back, eyes wide, fighting the rising panic. The mirror's surface began to clear, the stick figures melting away into the swirling fog as if they'd never been there at all. But the cold chill in my bones lingered, a spectral imprint of that contact. I stumbled from the bathroom, wrapping myself in the towel, the room spinning with the weight of unspoken truths pressing against me. Logic screamed for explanation, exhaustion, stress, hallucination, but the growing certainty clawed at my sanity. Something had reached out through the veil, something desperate to be seen, to be remembered. That night, sleep remained elusive. Every shadow whispered secrets. Every breath felt borrowed from a world not my own. And the silent plea lingered, "Remember," echoing through the corridors of my restless mind. The plea, "Remember," echoed relentlessly in the hollow chambers of my mind, refusing to fade with the dawn. Each morning, I awoke with the whisper still clinging to my thoughts, a spectral thread weaving through the fabric of my waking hours. Days bled into restless nights. The apartment, once a sanctuary from the chaos of the world, became a labyrinth of shadows and half-seen shapes. Reflections in windows and mirrors morphed into fleeting silhouettes, vanishing when confronted. The silence that had been so profound now hummed with unseen tension, a quiet symphony of presence and absence. I found myself drawn, almost against my will, back to that bathroom, to the fogged glass that had first betrayed the silhouette's existence. Each time I approached, the condensation seemed to shift, forming new patterns, enigmatic symbols that teased at forgotten memories and ancient stories long buried. Desperation clawed at me. I scoured dusty archives and local lore, uncovering whispers of a woman named Eleanor, her life a tragic tapestry woven with loss and longing. She was said to have vanished without a trace, leaving behind a legacy of unanswered questions and broken hearts. As the boundary between past and present frayed, I realized I was not just an observer but a participant in a haunting narrative that stretched beyond my understanding. The apparition's plea was not merely a call for remembrance but an invocation, a summons to uncover truths obscured by time and sorrow. And with each passing day, the veil between worlds thinned, threatening to unravel the fragile grip I held on reality itself. The whispers about Eleanor grew louder in the recesses of my mind as I delved deeper into her story. She was more than a forgotten tenant, she was a thread woven tightly into the fabric of the building's haunted past. The more I learned, the more her presence felt less like a haunting and more like a message, urgent, unfinished, desperate. Local archives revealed snippets of her life, a woman marked by tragedy, who had lived alone, withdrawn, her days shadowed by loss. Letters hinted at a love lost to time, a betrayal that fractured her spirit. Rumors told of her retreating to the sanctuary of the bathroom, where the steam became her veil, her escape, her silent confessional. I began to suspect that the silhouette in the shower was Eleanor's imprint, a fragment of her lingering sorrow reaching across the boundary of life and death, bound to the place where she had sought refuge and solace. My dreams grew restless and vivid. I saw through Eleanor's eyes, the ache of solitude, the cold isolation, the moment she pressed her hand to the glass, trying to communicate a truth lost to time. I felt her grief, her yearning to be seen, to be remembered. By day, I pieced together her story, by night, I relived it. The apartment's silence was no longer empty, it pulsed with her presence, a living memory woven into the walls. I realized that to free her, and perhaps myself, I would need to confront the shadows of the past, unravel the secrets hidden behind the steam, and face the darkness that bound us both. The tension between us settled into a strange rhythm, a silent dance of mirrored movements with that 1-second delay, like a haunting echo trapped just beyond reach. The warmth of the hand pressed against mine was both reassuring and unnerving, a paradox that twisted in my chest. I wrapped myself in a towel, muscles still trembling, heart pounding with a cocktail of fear and fascination. The bathroom, once a place of comfort, had transformed into a threshold between worlds, where reality frayed and shadows whispered secrets only I could hear. In the days that followed, the silhouette remained, a silent companion shadowing my every move, never aggressive, never cruel, but impossibly present. Its mimicry became unsettlingly precise, predicting gestures before I made them, as if it was learning, growing aware. I began keeping a journal, documenting every encounter, every shift in the patterns. I scoured old records and folklore, searching for any clue that could explain this trapped presence. The name Eleanor haunted my thoughts, her story a tapestry of sorrow, loss, and a desperate yearning for recognition. Late at night, when the apartment was still and the world outside forgotten, I spoke aloud, hoping my words might reach beyond the glass. I see you. I remember you. Sometimes, the steam would swirl into new shapes, a heart, a tear, a hand reaching out. And sometimes, I thought I saw the faintest shimmer of a smile. Yet the question lingered, was this a plea for help, a warning, or a tether binding us both to a fate neither could escape? The silhouette had become an unyielding presence, neither entirely separate nor fully integrated into my reality, a quiet echo of another life reflected in the steamy glass. Our silent dance continued, each mirrored movement weaving an unspoken bond, fragile yet undeniable. Over time, the fear I once felt gave way to a strange familiarity, a connection that transcended the boundaries of flesh and vapor. I found myself talking to the silhouette during those long, solitary moments, sharing fragments of my day, my hopes, and the fears I dared not voice aloud. Sometimes, when the apartment was shrouded in stillness, the glass would ripple softly, a faint shimmer hinting at acknowledgement. But beneath the growing connection lurked an aching void, a story waiting to unfold. Driven by an irresistible pull, I delved deeper into the building's history and Eleanor's tragic tale. She was a woman shaped by loss, a love betrayed, a life unraveling within these walls. The bathroom had been her refuge and prison, the place where she sought solace but found only loneliness. Her story was etched not just in faded documents and whispered rumors but in the very air that surrounded me, waiting for someone to listen, to remember. One night, as I traced my fingers along the fogged glass, the silhouette moved differently. No longer a mere mimic, it raised a hand, then traced a shape, a broken heart, cracked and bleeding across the mist. My breath caught, and I realized that the silhouette was reaching out, not just for me, but for release. Our bond deepened, a shared journey across the fragile veil between past and present, longing and redemption. And in that connection, I found both the key to Eleanor's story, and the fragile hope of healing us both. The figure smiled, a slow, unsettling curve that didn't reach the eyes, which gleamed with a cold, ancient knowing. This is the threshold, it said softly. A place between your world and mine, where reflections live and time folds upon itself. The air hung heavy, saturated with moisture and memories that felt both distant and intimately familiar. Walls breathed with a subtle pulse, the tiles beneath my feet shimmering like liquid glass. I swallowed hard, trying to steady my racing heart. "Why have you waited? What do you want from me?" The doppelganger took a step closer, its voice a mirror echo. "To be remembered. To be freed. To reclaim what was lost between moments, between breaths. You carry my shadow, and I carry yours." It gestured to the shifting walls, where scenes flickered, fragments of memories, forgotten choices, lives intertwined across time. "You are part of me, and I of you. Until the cycle breaks, we remain trapped here, echoes bound to a mirror's edge, caught in a dance of delay and anticipation." I felt the weight of those words like a stone settling in my chest, the chilling truth unraveling before me. The silhouette reached out again, this time beckoning not just my hands but my very soul. I faced a choice: retreat to the familiar yet haunted reality I'd known, or step fully into this shadowed realm to seek release, for both of us. The air between us thickened, charged with an electric tension that seemed to pulse in time with my heartbeat. The silhouette's eyes bore into mine, a silent plea wrapped in centuries of loneliness and longing. I felt the weight of our shared existence pressing down, the invisible threads that bound us taut and unyielding. A tremor ran through me as I hesitated, torn between the safety of the known and the terrifying promise of release. The bathroom beyond the translucent veil beckoned, normal, familiar, yet forever altered by what I had seen and felt. And beyond this threshold lay the unknown, a realm where time twisted, memories fractured, and shadows whispered truths that defied comprehension. Taking a slow, deliberate breath, I stepped forward, allowing the glass to yield beneath my fingers once more. The world seemed to ripple and bend, colors bleeding at the edges as I crossed the boundary fully. The silhouette mirrored my movement, stepping beside me, no longer a reflection but a companion in this liminal space. Together, we moved through a labyrinth of fragmented moments, glimpses of lives lived and unlived, choices made and unmade, joys found and sorrow endured. The walls echoed with voices, a chorus of past selves reaching out from the depths of time. In the heart of this shifting maze, I found a doorway, a portal shimmering with an ethereal light. The silhouette turned to me, its expression softening, hope flickering like a fragile flame. "This is the passage," it whispered. "Beyond lies freedom, or oblivion. The choice is yours." I reached out, fingers brushing the radiant threshold. The warmth of possibility surged through me, mingling with the cold fear of the unknown. As I prepared to step through, the silhouette clasped my hand, grounding me. "Remember," it said gently. "We are one. Whatever path you choose, I walk with you." With that, I crossed into the light. The room's atmosphere was heavy, thick with the weight of forgotten years and untold stories. The peeling wallpaper fluttered faintly in the stale air, like the whispers of ghosts long settled into the fabric of the inn. The floorboards beneath my feet creaked ominously as I stepped cautiously toward the bathroom, the dark stains spreading like shadows cast by memories too painful to face. The bathroom door hung slightly ajar, its once bright white paint dulled and cracked. Beyond it lay the copper-framed mirror, the very object Mrs. Hargrove had warned me about. It stood on a battered vanity, its surface clouded with age but still gleaming faintly in the dim light filtering through the small window. As I approached, the air grew inexplicably colder. The metallic scent intensified, sharp and biting, stirring something deep inside me, a sense of reverence mixed with dread. My reflection shimmered strangely in the glass, flickering between clarity and distortion as if the mirror itself were breathing, alive with a presence beyond the physical. I reached out to touch the cool surface, fingers trembling slightly. The instant my skin met the glass, a sudden rush of images flooded my mind, faces of travelers long gone, their stories etched into the mirror's depths. I saw laughter and tears, love and loss, moments frozen in time yet aching to be remembered. Then, a shadow crossed the reflection, a figure standing just behind me, impossibly still, watching. I spun around, heart pounding, but the room was empty. Only the silence answered. Turning back to the mirror, I realized this was no ordinary glass. It was a vessel of memories, a silent witness to the lives that had passed through the Black Ridge Inn, especially those connected to Room 17 and the forgotten copper mine. Mrs. Hargrove's words echoed in my mind, "The old always speaks to those willing to listen." And now, the mirror was speaking to me. The history of the Black Ridge Inn was as layered and weathered as the peeling wallpaper in Room 17. Built in the late 1800s, the inn had once been a bustling refuge for miners and their families who toiled at the nearby copper mine, a place of hard work, rough camaraderie, and quiet desperation. The mine itself was a source of both prosperity and tragedy. Tales told of sudden collapses, unexplained disappearances, and whispered curses that clung to the land like thick fog. Room 17, perched at the end of the east wing overlooking the dense forest, had long been shrouded in a veil of mystery and superstition. Local legend held that the room was once occupied by a woman named Clara Whitmore, the widow of a miner who perished in one of the mine's darkest disasters. Clara was said to have become consumed by grief and rage, pacing the room night after night, staring into the copper-framed mirror that now awaited me. Stories told of her sudden disappearance one stormy night, no trace left but her belongings and a shattered reflection in that very mirror. Some believed her spirit remained trapped within the glass, a restless echo of sorrow and vengeance. As I pieced together the fragments of history, I learned that after Clara's vanishing, strange occurrences plagued Room 17, guests reporting cold spots, flickering lights, and shadows that moved independently of their sources. The room was sealed off for years after water damage exposed these disturbances, earning it a reputation no staff dared to challenge. My task was not only to repair the physical decay but to unravel the intangible threads of tragedy woven into the inn's fabric, to listen to the stories the old walls and the copper mirror held, and perhaps bring peace to the restless soul bound within. The days that followed became a relentless pursuit of Clara Whitmore's story, a labyrinth of faded newspaper clippings, brittle letters, and whispered anecdotes from the town's oldest residents. Each fragment revealed a woman broken by loss. Her husband's death in the mine had shattered her world, and the mirror in Room 17 had become her confessional, her prison, and perhaps her curse. I found accounts of Clara's last known days, neighbors recalling her restless pacing, the mournful songs she sang into the night, and the eerie glow she claimed to see in the mirror's depths. One letter, yellowed and fragile, hinted at her desperation, a plea for forgiveness, a warning of the darkness growing within her. Determined to uncover the truth, I spent evenings alone in the room, the copper mirror before me, its surface a silent sentinel. As night deepened, the atmosphere thickened, shadows lengthening until they pooled like ink in the corners. Objects shifted subtly, books nudged off shelves, faint murmurs floated on the air, and the mirror's reflection sometimes seemed to flicker, revealing moments not my own. Faces blurred, eyes pleading, and once, for a heartbeat, Clara herself appeared, her sorrowful gaze meeting mine through the glass. The air grew cold, breath visible in the dim light. I realized that Clara's spirit was tethered to the room by more than grief, something darker lingered, a force born of tragedy and unresolved pain, feeding on the fear and silence. Each night, I listened to the stories the mirror whispered, piecing together the night Clara vanished, a night when the mine had collapsed again, trapping souls below, while above, in the inn, a tempest raged, and Clara faced her own despair reflected endlessly in the glass. The boundary between past and present blurred. I knew that to free her, I would have to confront the shadows lingering in Room 17, and face the secrets buried deep within both the inn and myself. The air in Room 17 felt heavier than before, as if the history embedded within its walls had seeped into the very atmosphere. The copper-framed mirror stood silently, an ancient sentinel bearing witness to untold stories. Each time I entered the room, my gaze was inevitably drawn to it, and each time, a creeping unease settled deep within my bones. I examined the mirror more closely under the morning light. The patterns along the frame seemed to shift subtly, dancing between delicate vines and cryptic symbols that defied immediate recognition. The glass's tarnished surface wasn't just a matter of age, it held a strange depth, layers folding into one another like pages in a forgotten tome. I tried to trace the source of the cold prickling sensation, but it eluded me, as if the mirror itself breathed with a life of its own. That night, the temperature plunge at exactly 3:17 a.m. echoed in my mind like a tolling bell. The phrase, "the copper comes from the mine, the glass from their bones," repeated in my thoughts with relentless urgency. I couldn't shake the feeling that the mirror was more than a relic, that it was a vessel, forged from the very earth and lives bound to the old copper mine. Determined to understand, I began researching the mine's history and its connection to the inn. Tales of miners lost to sudden collapses, bodies never recovered, and strange phenomena around the site surfaced. Some miners believed the mine was cursed, haunted by the spirits of those trapped below, their pain and anger infused into the very minerals extracted from the earth. The mirror, I realized, might be a repository, not just of reflections but of memories, anguish, and restless souls bound by tragedy. With this revelation, I returned to room 17, steeling myself for whatever awaited in the shadows cast by the copper frame. As the days passed and the restoration work progressed, the Black Ridge Inn seemed to awaken from a long slumber, but not with the gentle stirrings of renewal. Instead, a creeping chill settled over the halls, seeping into the woodwork and creeping beneath the floorboards like a silent frost. The once distant echoes of forgotten lives became urgent whispers, brushing past my ears in the dead of night. Room 17, once isolated and silent, began to pulse with a sinister energy. At first, it was small things, tools inexplicably misplaced, shadows darting just beyond the corner of my eye, a faint tapping sound echoing through the empty corridors. The air in the east wing grew thick and suffocating, as though the very walls bore down with unseen weight. One evening, as I worked late removing the water-damaged floorboards, the temperature plunged suddenly, my breath crystallizing in the air. The copper-framed mirror in room 17 shimmered with an unnatural light, casting fractured reflections that twisted and writhed against the peeling wallpaper. The faint smell of damp earth and something metallic, like fresh blood, lingered long after I left the room. Then came the voices. Soft at first, unintelligible murmurs that seemed to ripple from the mirror itself, weaving through the timbers and settling in my bones. They grew louder with each passing night, anguished cries, whispered warnings, the mournful lament of souls trapped between worlds. Sleep became a stranger. Doors slammed in empty hallways, footsteps echoed where none should tread, and cold drafts whispered secrets through cracked windows. Guests who stayed in the remaining rooms reported restless nights, strange dreams, and an overwhelming sense of being watched. Despite these growing disturbances, I pressed on, compelled to finish the restoration and uncover the truth buried beneath layers of dust and despair. But the inn was fighting back, its haunted heart beating with a furious pulse, warning me that some histories were better left undisturbed. The air in room 17 was thick with tension. The night I decided to confront whatever force had taken root there. The dim glow of my lantern flickered against the peeling wallpaper, casting long, dancing shadows that seemed to stretch and twist of their own accord. The copper-framed mirror hung on the wall, its surface rippling subtly, as if alive, reflecting not just my image but something darker lurking just beneath. I stepped inside, the floorboards creaking underfoot, each sound amplified in the oppressive silence. The temperature had dropped sharply, my breath billowed out in thick clouds. As I approached the mirror, a low, mournful whisper rose from the room itself, growing in intensity, weaving into a chorus of voices, some pleading, some accusing, all laden with sorrow. Suddenly, the mirror's surface shimmered violently, and the figure of Clara Whitmore emerged, her translucent form flickering like a candle flame caught in a draught. Her eyes, hollow and filled with grief, locked onto mine. "You've come to remember," she whispered, her voice both fragile and commanding. "To see what was lost, what was taken." The room seemed to pulse with energy as the past and present collided. The peeling wallpaper behind her transformed into vivid scenes, a mining disaster, the stormy night of her disappearance, the shattered lives left in its wake. Clara reached out, her spectral hand passing through the glass toward me. I instinctively raised my own, fingers nearly touching hers. "Release me," she pleaded, tears shimmering like liquid silver. "Break the curse that binds us both." The mirror cracked, a spiderweb of fractures spreading rapidly, echoing like thunder. The voices rose to a crescendo, anguished, desperate, before a sudden silence slammed down like a tomb. I staggered back, heart pounding, the room suddenly still and cold. The mirror's surface was fractured but held its form, the spectral light faded. Yet I knew, somehow, the bond was broken, or at least weakened. Clara's story, long buried in shadows, was finally heard. The weight of Mrs. Hargrove's words settled heavily in the room, thickening the already oppressive atmosphere. Her glance lingered on the copper-framed mirror as if it were a living thing, a silent guardian of secrets best left undisturbed. That night, sleep remained elusive. The image of the pale, hollow-eyed face pressed itself behind my eyelids, relentless and accusing. I found myself drawn back to room 17 despite every instinct warning me away. The hallway outside was quiet, the inn's old timbers groaning softly with the breath of history. Stepping inside, the temperature dropped immediately, a cold breath sweeping through the air. The mirror awaited, its surface rippling faintly as though stirred by invisible currents. I approached cautiously, eyes fixed on the glass. The tarnished surface seemed to deepen, drawing me into its depths like a dark, swirling pool. Slowly, a new face began to emerge, faint, shadowed, but undeniably human. This time, it was different, not a desperate plea but a solemn witness. Eyes met mine across the barrier, heavy with sorrow and unspoken truths. The tapping returned, soft, deliberate, a heartbeat echoing through the silence. As I pressed my hand to the glass, the cold seemed to seep through, a bridge between worlds. The mirror's reflections shifted and twisted, revealing fractured glimpses of the inn's past, the miners, the storms, the whispered tragedies, and at the center, the figure of Clara Whitmore, forever bound to the copper and glass. In that moment, I understood that room 17 was not merely haunted, it was a repository of memory, a crossroads where time converged and sorrow lingered. I stepped back, breath caught between fear and awe, knowing that the true restoration would be one of stories and spirits, as much as wood and plaster. The walls of the Black Ridge Inn carried more than just the weight of timber and plaster, they held echoes, whispers folded into the grain and mortar, spectral imprints etched by time and tragedy. As I lingered in room 17, the copper mirror's haunting visage lingering in my mind's eye, I felt myself pulled into the inn's deeper history, one written not in books, but in shadows and sorrow. The inn was born in an era where hope and hardship danced hand in hand. It sheltered miners returning from the copper veins carved deep beneath the rugged hills, a place where bodies and spirits alike bore the scars of unforgiving toil. The miners' laughter once echoed in these halls, mingling with prayers whispered for safety, and the quiet laments of those left behind. Yet beneath this veneer of rugged camaraderie lay fractures, bitter disputes, heartbreak, and secrets too heavy to speak aloud. Clara Whitmore was one such story, a woman caught in the turbulent tide of loss. Her husband, a miner with a fierce heart, had vanished in a collapse that shook the mountain and shattered lives. The copper mirror became her solitary confidant, reflecting back the anguish she could voice to no one else. More than a century passed, but Clara's grief refused release. Her presence seeped into the very fabric of the inn, the warped floorboards, the peeling wallpaper, the chill that clung to room 17 like a shroud. Other guests had whispered of restless shadows, cold spots that chilled the marrow, and reflections that twisted into faces not their own. The mirror itself, crafted from copper mined in those very hills and glass forged with the residue of lives lost, became a vessel. It held not just Clara's sorrow, but the collective weight of all who had suffered and vanished in those unforgiving mountains. Time here was fractured, a palimpsest of moments overlapping, where past and present bled into each other. As I pieced together these spectral histories, I understood that my task was more than renovation. It was a reckoning with the echoes that refused to fade, a journey into the heart of grief and memory carved into every corner of the Black Ridge Inn. The deeper I ventured into the Black Ridge Inn's haunted past, the more I sensed that every corner, every creaking floorboard, bore witness to a story waiting to be told. The inn was less a building and more a vessel of collective memory, a place where the sorrow of forgotten souls lingered like a fog, stubborn and unyielding. Each night, as shadows lengthened and the world outside fell silent, the inn seemed to awaken. Footsteps echoed softly down empty hallways, whispers curled like smoke through the air, and the copper mirror in room 17 shimmered with a spectral light that defied explanation. Guests who dared stay near the east wing spoke of sudden chills that wrapped around them like icy fingers, of dreams where they wandered the pine forests only to find themselves lost in endless twilight. Some reported glimpses of figures, miners in worn clothing, women clutching faded photographs, children whose laughter echoed faintly yet never fully reached their ears. One tale haunted me particularly, the story of Samuel Hargrove, a young miner who vanished in the collapse that claimed Clara's husband. His fiancée, a woman named Lillian, was said to have checked into the inn shortly after his disappearance, descending into despair. Locals whispered that her spirit lingered in the west wing, her restless longing a mirror to Clara's grief. The inn was a tapestry of intertwined lives and lingering regrets, each thread woven with loss and yearning. The copper mirror, forged from the very ore that had claimed so many lives, was the heart of this spectral web, a silent witness to joys and tragedies, hope and heartbreak. As I walked the halls, I could almost hear the chorus of voices, souls caught between worlds, yearning for release or perhaps simply for remembrance. The past was never truly past here, it was a living, breathing presence that seeped through the walls and whispered in the silence. My work was no longer just about restoration of wood and paint. It was about honoring these echoes, giving voice to the silence, and perhaps, finding a way to lay these restless spirits to peace. Hargrove, my voice barely steady as I recounted the events that had driven me away. Her silence on the other end was heavy, laden with understanding and unspoken warnings. I thought the mirror was just a relic, I confessed, but it's something far more, alive. The faces, the hands, they're trapped, trying to get out. And that journal, Elliot Pute's words, it all makes sense now. The mind, the metal liquid, the glass. It's like a prison. Mrs. Hargrove sighed, a sound that seemed to carry decades of sorrow. You were right to leave. Some things at Black Ridge are better left undisturbed. That mirror, it holds more than reflections. It holds memories, souls caught in the collapse. The inn remembers, and it doesn't forgive. I felt the weight of her words settle deep within me. The journal lay open on the motel bed, its faded ink a testament to secrets too dark to face. Yet, part of me knew the story was far from over. Behind the veil of copper and glass, the trapped voices waited, their silent pleas echoing through time. And somewhere, in the shadowed depths of the Black Ridge Inn, the past was still reaching out, hungry for release, for justice, for peace. Days stretched into restless nights as I grappled with the enormity of what I had uncovered. The journal's brittle pages weighed heavily on my conscience, each entry a window into a past drenched in pain and unfinished business. Elliot Pute's frantic writing spoke not only of a mysterious metallic substance but of a desperate attempt to contain something that should have never been disturbed. Haunted by the mirror's relentless presence in my thoughts, I began seeking out experts, historians, metallurgists, and paranormal researchers, anyone who might shed light on the unnatural alloy and the sinister legacy it bore. Most dismissed the tale as folklore, but a few offered chilling insights into the properties of metal infused with spiritual energy, a conduit between worlds forged in trauma and tragedy. Meanwhile, visions haunted me. Flickers of shadowed miners trapped in endless tunnels, faces pressed against unseen barriers, their silent screams etched into the fabric of the inn. At times, I sensed their presence close, an icy breath on my neck, a whisper of sorrow in the wind, the soft tap of fingernails against glass that no one else heard. Determined, I returned to the town, poring over archives and speaking with locals who still remembered the mine's last days. The collapse had been sudden, catastrophic, sealing dozens beneath tons of earth and rock. Rescue attempts were futile, many bodies were never recovered, their souls left to wander the dark veins they had once called home. The inn, built as a refuge, had inadvertently become a mausoleum, its very structure infused with the anguish of those lost souls, the copper mirror acting as both prison and portal. I realized breaking the curse required more than understanding, it demanded a reckoning, a ritual to sever the ties binding the spirits to this world. Armed with newfound knowledge and a fragile hope, I prepared to confront the darkness within room 17 once more, aware that the path ahead would test every ounce of my courage and resolve. The darkness swallowed the corridor as the fluorescent light died, leaving me in a void where sound became everything. The rhythmic squeak grew steadily closer, a slow, deliberate cadence that scraped against the polished linoleum floor like a warning. My heart pounded a frantic rhythm in my chest, each beat echoing the dread curling in my stomach. I strained my eyes, trying to pierce the blackness, but the shadows seemed to swallow all light, twisting and writhing as if alive. The faint glow of an emergency exit sign cast long, eerie shadows that stretched toward me, but offered no comfort. Then, out of the darkness, a shape emerged, a wheelchair, its rubber wheels squeaking in perfect time with the haunting sound. But no occupant sat within it. It rolled forward steadily on its own, as if guided by unseen hands, tracing a path down the corridor. The silence was shattered by a whisper, soft and distant, barely audible over the echo of my own breathing. "Don't look away," it urged, a voice dripping with sorrow and something far colder. I wanted to turn and run, to escape the building that felt less like a place and more like a trap. But curiosity rooted me in place, an anchor amid the rising tide of terror. As the wheelchair approached the intersection, it stopped abruptly. The wheels creaked as if bearing a heavy burden. Then, the unmistakable sound of fingernails scratching the floor began anew, this time closer, coming from the shadows just beyond. A chill coursed down my spine, and I knew with a certainty that this night would not pass without revelation, or ruin. The history of Blackwood Psychiatric Clinic was a dark tapestry woven with threads of neglect, secrecy, and suffering, stories long buried beneath its sterile walls and flickering fluorescent lights. Officially, the clinic closed following a series of investigations into patient care irregularities. But whispers in the nearby town told a far grimmer tale. Blackwood had once been a beacon of hope for the mentally ill, a place promising healing and refuge. Yet, behind the locked doors and clinical facades, a chilling reality unfolded. Patients reported strange treatments, experiments that blurred the lines between therapy and cruelty. Some vanished without explanation, others emerged changed, haunted by unseen horrors that the staff refused to acknowledge. The investigations uncovered damning evidence, unauthorized procedures, medication tampering, and instances of severe abuse. Several staff members were implicated in cover-ups and intimidation tactics, silencing those who dared speak out. Despite settlements and official closures, the true extent of the clinic's darkness remained veiled, known only to a few brave souls who whispered warnings in hushed tones. Locals spoke of a shadow that lingered, an evil born from pain and betrayal that refused to die with the building's closure. Patient spirits, they said, were trapped in the endless corridors, replaying their torment in an eternal loop. As I walked those forsaken halls, the weight of this grim history pressed upon me. Each flicker of the dying lights, each cold gust that swept through the empty rooms, seemed to carry echoes of silent screams and shattered lives. The wheelchair, the scratching nails, they were not mere hauntings. They were memories made manifest, cries for justice from souls who had been forgotten. Understanding this history was not just a matter of curiosity, it was a necessary step toward confronting whatever lingered, whatever watched from the shadows, waiting for its story to be told, and its pain to be acknowledged. The echoing silence of the abandoned Blackwood Psychiatric Clinic pressed against me like a living thing, suffocating and relentless. Each step I took down the long, narrow corridor seemed to stir memories that were never meant to surface. The air was thick with a coldness that no heater could touch, a chill laced with the metallic tang of forgotten suffering. As I reached the end of the hallway, the faint glow of an emergency exit sign flickered above a heavy, steel door. A sudden metallic clang echoed from within, sending a shiver down my spine. My hand trembled as I reached for the handle, the weight of the building's dark past pressing heavily on my shoulders. Pushing the door open, I entered what had once been the electroconvulsive therapy room, a place where hope and horror had once collided in a clinical nightmare. The walls bore yellowed stains, and rusted equipment lay scattered like relics of torment. An old metal chair sat center stage, its leather worn and cracked, as if waiting patiently for its next victim. Suddenly, the lights flickered violently before plunging the room into complete darkness. The temperature dropped sharply, my breath fogged the stale air. A low, guttural whisper began, barely audible at first, then rising into a chorus of anguished voices that seemed to seep from the very walls. Then came the unmistakable sound of footsteps, heavy, deliberate, pacing the room. I spun, flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, but saw nothing. The footsteps grew louder, circling me, echoing off the cold, tiled walls. A sharp, desperate cry pierced the air, a sound so raw, so filled with pain, it ripped at the edges of my sanity. The old chair's restraints rattled violently, as if an unseen figure struggled to break free. Frozen, I watched as the spectral form of a patient materialized, a gaunt figure with hollow eyes, his mouth opening in a silent scream. The air around him shimmered with despair. "Remember us," the apparition whispered, voice fractured by years of torment. "Tell our story." The lights surged back, blinding in their intensity, and then flickered out again, leaving me alone in oppressive silence. My heart pounded as I stumbled backward, the weight of the clinic's dark legacy pressing down like a stone. I knew then that the past here was not buried, it was alive, demanding reckoning. The oppressive glow of the emergency lights cast jagged shadows across the security room, their sickly amber hue crawling along the walls like living things. My breath came in ragged gasps as I slammed the door shut behind me, sliding the heavy lock into place. Every muscle screamed to keep moving, to escape the nightmare that had begun to unfold. I stared at the monitors, each one flickering between grainy images of empty hallways and shadowed corners, except for that single screen, frozen on my reflection from hours before. A cold chill swept through me as I realized, the intruder was nowhere to be seen on any camera. The crimson nurse existed beyond the reach of surveillance, beyond the grasp of logic. A soft tapping began at the office window, the same tapping I'd heard before, slow and deliberate. My skin prickled as the sound grew louder, echoing through the room like a message from the void. I edged toward the window, the glass opaque with grime, obscuring whatever lurked outside. Suddenly, the lights flickered again, plunging the room into darkness for a heartbeat before emergency lighting snapped back on. And there, pressed against the glass, was the silhouette of that unnerving nurse, cap shadowing his face, crimson uniform soaked in shadow, his head tilted in that impossible way. His dark eyes seemed to pierce right through me, demanding something unspoken. Behind him, the faint outline of the gurney lingered, its wheels slick with the rust-colored liquid that had begun to corrode the very floor beneath us. My throat tightened as the whispers started, disjointed voices overlapping, a chorus of forgotten pain and fury. Names, dates, and fractured pleas, echoes of lives trapped in the clinic's decaying halls, waiting for release or revenge. The crimson nurse's silhouette shifted, pressing his hand to the glass as if to breach the boundary, and the tapping transformed into a frantic pounding that resonated in my chest. The nightmare was no longer confined to shadow or silence, it was here, now, demanding to be acknowledged. The pounding at the window was relentless now, each sharp knock a hammer blow against my sanity. I pressed my palms flat against the cold glass, feeling a tremor ripple through the barrier, like a pulse connecting me to the shadowed figure beyond. The crimson nurse's dark eyes bore into me, unblinking, full of silent accusation and sorrow that cut deeper than any scream. I stumbled back, heart pounding so fiercely it threatened to burst free from my chest. My breath hitched in ragged gasps as the whispered voices swelled, overlapping into a cacophony of agony and despair that clawed at the edges of my mind. Names. Faces. Stories left unfinished. They demanded to be remembered, to be heard. I realized then this was no mere haunting, it was a reckoning. The clinic's dark past was bleeding into the present, pulling me into its depths, offering no quarter and no escape. As my legs trembled beneath me, the door behind me slammed shut with a deafening crash. The room plunged into darkness, save for the sickly glow of the emergency lights. Panic surged through me, but beneath it, something colder, sharper, a terrible resolve. If the past demanded acknowledgement, then I would not look away. With shaking hands, I grabbed the flashlight from the desk, the beam cutting a narrow path through the gloom. I moved toward the door, ready to face whatever waited beyond. The air grew heavier, the whispers clearer, and as I stepped into the corridor, the floor beneath me pulsed with a faint rhythm, like the heartbeat of the building itself. The crimson nurse stood waiting, the gurney beside him, wheels slick with the corroding rust that had begun to claim the clinic's soul. His voice, when it came, was a hollow whisper that seemed to reverberate inside my skull, "Remember us." I nodded, the weight of 1,000 untold stories settling upon my shoulders. And in that moment, I understood, this was no longer just a job. It was a journey into the heart of darkness, where past and present converged, and only truth could set the restless free. The gurney's wheels left slick trails on the floor as it inched closer, its presence a cruel reminder of the fate awaiting me. The metallic taste thickened in my mouth, bile rising with the realization that my fate was sealed long before I stepped into Blackwood's shadowed halls. Dr. Carver's voice, a chilling chorus of layered tones, echoed through the room. "You belong here now, Marcus. The cycle must continue. The work must be done." Her smile stretched impossibly wide, a grotesque mask of false warmth that failed to mask the malice beneath. I stumbled backward, panic clawing at my mind, but the room seemed to close in, walls bending and breathing with a life of their own. The monitors flickered, showing distorted faces, former janitors, staff members, trapped in the same endless loop, their eyes pleading silently for release. The crimson nurse extended a pale hand toward me, inviting, compelling. The air pulsed with a heavy inevitability. I realized then that the real horror was not just the spirits or the hauntings, but the endless perpetuation of a nightmare, a machinery of control that consumed those who enter. My resistance waned as the nurse's hand reached out, the rust-colored liquid dripping onto my skin, burning cold and impossible. The room blurred, time fracturing, and I felt myself pulled toward the gurney, toward a fate scripted before I even arrived. In that moment between fear and surrender, a sliver of clarity broke through. I grasped for a fragment of my will, a thread of hope that maybe, just maybe, the cycle could be broken. As the crimson nurse's hand closed around mine, a searing cold shot through my veins, freezing me in place. The rust-colored liquid seeped into my skin, burning with a chill that no warmth could soothe. The gurney creaked beneath us, its wheels spinning slower as if sensing the shift in my resolve. The room around me warped and shimmered, the walls folding into themselves, time fracturing into shards of memory and nightmare. Faces appeared in the flickering monitors, eyes wide with terror, mouths frozen in silent screams, each one a reflection of the fate I risked embracing. I felt myself pulled into the endless loop of Blackwood's haunted history, a spectral passenger aboard the machinery of despair. Days blurred into nights, shifts repeating in cruel perpetuity, the weight of forgotten souls pressing relentlessly against my mind. My identity frayed at the edges, slipping away like sand through trembling fingers. Yet, within that abyss, a spark remained, a desperate hope seeded by my refusal to surrender fully. Memories of life outside the clinic, of warmth and light, flickered like distant stars through the darkness. The whispered names of those lost called to me, urging resistance. But resistance came at a cost. Each act of defiance summoned more wrath from the shadows. Apparitions materialized with increased ferocity, corridors twisted into labyrinths designed to entrap. The crimson nurse became both jailer and executioner, enforcing the unyielding rules of this spectral prison. My physical form grew gaunt, eyes hollowed by sleepless nights haunted by whispers and scratching nails. The journal, once a talisman of hope, lay forgotten, its pages torn and scattered across the floor. The boundaries between past and present, reality and nightmare, dissolved until I no longer knew where I ended and Blackwood began. Still, I fought, clinging to the faintest glimmer of self, seeking cracks in the eternal darkness where escape might lie. Every choice carved new scars in the fabric of this cursed place, but also forged a path toward reckoning. In Blackwood's haunted walls, consequences are eternal. But so too is the possibility of redemption, for those willing to face the shadows within and without. In the suffocating silence of the clinic's endless night, my mind began to unravel like frayed threads pulled taut beyond endurance. Days, or what passed for days in this spectral limbo, blended into one another, each a mirror of the last, smeared with the haunting faces of those lost before me. I felt the weight of countless eyes upon me, the unblinking gazes of forgotten souls imprisoned by Blackwood's merciless grip. Memories of a life beyond these walls slipped away, replaced by shadows that whispered incessantly, their voices curling around my thoughts like smoke. The walls themselves seemed alive, breathing and pulsing with a malign energy that seeped into my bones, twisting reality into a macabre kaleidoscope of nightmare and recollection. I tried to hold on to fragments of sanity, clutching the tattered remnants of the journal I once possessed. But it too slipped through my fingers, pages torn and scattered, words dissolving into obscurity. The Crimson Nurse's presence was constant, both guardian and tormentor, his hollow gaze a relentless reminder that escape was a fleeting illusion. One night, amid the oppressive gloom, I found myself drawn to the heart of the clinic, the ancient treatment wing where countless horrors had unfolded. The air was thick with the metallic scent of blood and rust, memories etched deep into the cracked tiles beneath my feet. There, in the flickering glow of a dying emergency light, I confronted the spectral figure of Dr. Eliza Carver once more. Her smile was a twisted mask, eyes gleaming with cruel amusement. She spoke in that haunting chorus of voices, each word a dagger twisting in my soul. "You cannot leave, Marcus. You are part of Blackwood now, woven into its story, its suffering. Only by embracing the darkness can you find release." Desperation ignited a fire within me. I refused to become another lost soul trapped in endless torment. Summoning every shred of courage, I challenged her spectral form, demanding to know the truth behind the clinic's curse, and if redemption was possible. Her laughter echoed, a chilling symphony that reverberated through the hollow halls. Truth. Redemption. The clinic remembers everything, and forgives nothing. But perhaps there is a way. A reckoning that requires sacrifice. As she faded into the shadows, the air grew still, the oppressive weight momentarily lifting. A faint glimmer of hope flickered in the darkness, an invitation to confront the clinic's buried horrors and, maybe, break the cycle once and for all. A chill swept through me as the reflected lips formed words I couldn't hear, a silent whisper meant only for the shadows between reality and nightmare. My heart thundered, a storm raging behind my ribs, as I reached out to touch the mirror's cold surface, but my hand froze halfway, gripped by a terror deeper than reason. The time card in my pocket felt heavier, as if etched with invisible ink only I could read, a summons, a sentence, a tether pulling me inexorably back to Blackwood's grasp. I sank against the bathroom wall, the weight of what I had witnessed pressing down like the very walls of the clinic themselves. Escape was an illusion. Resistance was futile. Blackwood had claimed me, marked me. And somewhere, just beyond the veil of reflection, my other self awaited, silent, patient, and waiting for the moment to step fully into my world. The nightmare was far from over. The days that followed were shrouded in a thickening fog of dread, each moment weighed down by the invisible chains Blackwood had wrapped around me. The line between waking and nightmare blurred until they were indistinguishable, a perpetual twilight where shadows whispered and mirrors hid secrets. My reflection no longer felt like my own, it was a mask worn by a stranger lurking just beneath the surface. At work, my body moved on autopilot, hands and feet carrying out tasks as my mind wrestled with the growing presence clawing at my soul. The rust-colored stains began to appear, not just on the worn linoleum floors of the clinic but in my dreams, in my clothes, even faintly on my skin, as if the building's corruption was seeping into my flesh. Voices echoed incessantly in my ears, disjointed, layered, demanding compliance. The Crimson Nurse's hollow gaze haunted my every glance, his silent footsteps marking the rhythm of my unraveling. With every passing hour, the clinic's grip tightened, drawing me deeper into a reality shaped by sorrow, torment, and unyielding obligation. Even my friends and family noticed the change. Their concerned eyes, their tentative questions, faded into background noise. How could I explain that I was already becoming a prisoner, not just of a place, but of a fate written long before my arrival? At night, the walls seemed to pulse, the rusted wheels scraping just beyond my bedroom door. The time card, once a simple piece of plastic, had transformed into a talisman and a curse, its next punch already marked in invisible ink. Blackwood was not done with me. One evening, as the dusk bled into night, I caught a glimpse in a shop window, a figure dressed in crimson pushing an empty gurney, its face a swirling reflection of my own terror. I blinked, and it was gone, but the cold trace it left behind lingered in my bones. The pull was inexorable. Blackwood's dark legacy had become my shadow, a specter I could neither outrun nor fully confront. My world was fracturing, the thin veil separating me from the clinic's endless nightmare growing thinner every day. And I knew, with a crushing certainty, that soon I would cross the threshold once more, not as a visitor, but as part of the building itself. The darkness inside me grew heavier with each passing day, a suffocating weight that pressed against my chest and clouded my thoughts. The line between who I was and what Blackwood demanded blurred until they intertwined, a twisted knot of identity and obligation. I found myself waking from dreams not my own, visions of endless corridors filled with shadowed figures, their hollow eyes pleading silently for release, or retribution. My reflection betrayed me. In every mirror, I caught glimpses of a face not entirely mine, a visage twisted by sorrow and malevolence, lips curling into a semblance of a cruel smile just before vanishing. The air around me grew colder, thick with the scent of rust and old blood, as if the clinic's taint had seeped into the very fabric of my being. Friends and family recoiled as I withdrew, their voices fading into distant echoes beneath the growing storm in my mind. Attempts to resist were met with an unbearable pressure, a crushing force that threatened to consume every fragment of my will. The crimson nurse haunted my every step, his relentless presence a reminder that escape was an illusion. One night, drawn by a force I could neither understand nor fight, I found myself standing before the clinic's looming facade once again. The doors opened silently, welcoming me home. Inside, the whispers greeted me like old friends, and the rust-streaked floors beckoned me deeper into the darkness. As I crossed the threshold, the boundaries of my reality shattered completely. I was no longer a man fighting possession, I was becoming part of Blackwood's eternal nightmare, a sentinel trapped within its haunted halls, destined to watch, to wait, and to become a warning to those who might follow. The clinic had claimed me, and in doing so, ensured its dark legacy would never fade. The night was thick with fog as Emily Parker pulled her coat tighter around her, the unfamiliar chill of the outskirts creeping beneath her skin. She had arrived at Blackwood Psychiatric Clinic seeking a quiet place to finish her thesis, an abandoned building rumored to hold secrets, but more importantly, untouched by modern distractions. The town's hushed warnings echoed faintly in her mind, but curiosity outweighed caution. The heavy doors groaned open as she stepped inside, the stale air thick with dust and whispers of the past. Flickering emergency lights cast elongated shadows that danced along peeling walls. Somewhere deep within, the faint squeak of gurney wheels echoed, but Emily dismissed it as the building settling. As she wandered the labyrinthine corridors, a sudden draft brushed past her, carrying with it a metallic scent, rust and something more sinister. Her footsteps echoed alone, but from the corner of her eye, a figure clad in crimson nurse's uniform glided silently just beyond sight, its face obscured beneath a dark cap. Unaware of the fate that had already claimed Marcus, Emily felt an inexplicable pull, a silent summons deeper into Blackwood's heart. The walls seemed to breathe, the very building alive with restless memories. Her reflection flickered in shattered glass, eyes not entirely her own watching back. With every step, the whispers grew louder, weaving a symphony of sorrow and warning. The rust-colored stains reappeared beneath her feet, creeping closer like veins of a dark, living entity. Emily was no longer a visitor. She was becoming part of the story, a new thread woven into Blackwood's unending tapestry of despair. The steady cadence of his voice belied the storm brewing beneath his calm exterior. I studied him carefully, noting the flicker of unease that crossed his face whenever I made direct eye contact, like a shadow lurking just out of reach. There was something familiar yet disconcerting about the way he spoke, an echo of something I had long buried within myself. Noah began to describe the codes he heard, not as tormenting voices but as patterns, mathematical sequences intertwined with linguistic fragments, almost like a language encoded in numbers. He insisted they were messages, a puzzle he was compelled to solve. His words tumbled out with a rhythmic precision that was hypnotic yet haunting. As I listened, I couldn't shake the eerie sensation that the codes were not merely auditory hallucinations but threads pulling him, and somehow me, into an unseen web. The numbers scrawled in his file margins haunted me. They seemed less like random digits and more like coordinates or timestamps, signposts on a map leading into darkness. That night, I lay awake, the digits 11, 26, 81,423 cycling through my mind like a broken mantra. The shadows in my room seemed to ripple and shift, and the silence pressed in with a weight that made every breath a struggle. My own voice whispered from the edges of consciousness, repeating sequences I did not consciously know, yet somehow felt deeply connected to. The codes were more than symptoms, they were a summons, a call to confront a hidden reality woven between madness and truth. The codes whispered to me in dreams and waking moments alike, threading their way through the fabric of my thoughts until reality itself seemed to fray. I began obsessively tracing the sequences, searching for meaning in endless permutations of numbers and letters. The boundary between Noah's experience and my own blurred, the line between doctor and patient faded into uncertainty. Late one night, as rain hammered against my window and the city's muted hum faded into silence, the codes transformed before my eyes. They arranged themselves into a cryptic pattern, a map of sorts, leading to a place hidden beneath layers of history and shadow. Compelled beyond reason, I found myself pulled toward the coordinates encoded in the margins of Noah's file. The journey took me to an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of Boston, a relic of forgotten industry draped in ivy and neglect. Inside, walls were scrawled with symbols and numbers, echoes of the codes Noah heard. As I stepped deeper into the cavernous space, the air grew thick with a cold presence, and I felt the weight of secrets desperate to surface. Suddenly, the whispered sequences swelled into a chorus, voices overlapping in a haunting refrain. The warehouse seemed to pulse with energy, the codes no longer mere sounds but keys unlocking a hidden dimension, a doorway between what is seen and what lurks beyond. I realized then that Noah's affliction was a gateway, and I was caught in its widening maw. The codes were not madness but a message, an invitation to confront a darkness that fed on silence and fear. The room felt charged, as if the walls themselves absorbed the weight of the codes that haunted Noah's mind. On his desk lay an open notebook, pages dense with handwritten sequences and diagrams that twisted logic into impossible shapes. I noticed a whiteboard covered in numbers and symbols, connected by arrows and brackets in a sprawling, obsessive web. Noah motioned toward a laptop screen displaying a complex program he had written to analyze and decode the patterns. The codes, he explained, seemed to form a language, a cipher layered beneath the noise of everyday life, carrying a message from somewhere beyond ordinary perception. He pointed to a series of numbers, 11, 26, 8, 1, 4, 2, 3. These coordinates keep appearing in the codes, he said. They don't lead to a place on any map, but I think they represent something else, perhaps a moment in time or a key to unlocking what's hidden. As I listened, a chill settled over me. The phrase I'd seen in my notes echoed in my mind, numbers as doorways, sequences as keys. My professional skepticism warred with a creeping sense of inevitability. What if these codes were not just symptoms, but an invitation, an awakening to a truth long buried? Noah looked at me, eyes steady but distant. You're already part of it, whether you know it or not. The codes have been inside you, waiting to be heard. I swallowed hard, feeling the lines between sanity and something else begin to dissolve. The room seemed to pulse with quiet urgency, as if time itself held its breath. The room seemed to pulse with an unseen heartbeat, the numbers on Noah's whiteboard almost vibrating with an eerie energy. The codes weren't just random sequences, they were fragments of a message, echoes of something ancient and unfathomable, a language crafted not by human hands but by a force beyond comprehension. As days blurred into restless nights, I found myself haunted by whispered patterns in my mind, melodies of digits and symbols playing beneath my conscious thoughts. The boundary between my own memories and Noah's experiences dissolved, like two threads weaving into a single tapestry of foreboding knowledge. Driven by obsession, I began delving into arcane texts, ancient cryptography, and forbidden manuscripts that hinted at hidden intelligences communicating through numbers, a language older than language itself. The codes matched sequences found in esoteric traditions, sacred geometries, and even accounts of otherworldly contact that blurred the line between science and myth. One night, amidst a storm that rattled the windows, I uncovered a chilling passage describing a primordial entity known as the Cipher Weaver, a being said to encode the fate of worlds into patterns only the initiated could perceive. According to legend, those who hear its message are marked, chosen or cursed, to unravel truths that threaten the fabric of reality. The realization dawned with terrifying clarity. Noah and I were not merely patients and doctors caught in a shared psychosis. We were conduits for something vast and ancient, a spectral intelligence reaching through the void, seeking understanding, or perhaps something more. The codes were no longer just a puzzle. They were a summons. But the journal's whispers persisted, insistent and unyielding, like a relentless tide eroding the fortress of my denial. The room's edges blurred, the weight of unseen eyes pressing against my skin. My voice faltered, cracking under the strain of unbearable truths emerging from the depths of that leather-bound prison. "No," I gasped, staggering back, clutching the journal to my chest as if it might shield me. "This can't be real. It's a trick." Noah stepped closer, his eyes steady yet mournful. "It's your own truth, Dr. Mercer. You've carried these shadows for years, buried beneath layers of willful forgetting. The codes don't lie. The journal simply reveals what you refuse to face." A sudden chill swept through the room, extinguishing the faint light. The blank pages fluttered as if caught in a phantom breeze, turning themselves to a final, unopened section. A single phrase materialized, glowing faintly in the dimness. "The past is never silent." My breath caught as the words sank deep into my soul. I realized then that the codes, the journal, and Noah's revelations were threads of a tapestry I was both woven into and desperate to unravel. The hidden truths within me were no longer mine alone, they had become a shared burden, a cosmic summons toward an unknown reckoning. With shaking hands, I closed the journal once more. The path forward was uncertain, but one thing was clear: to confront the darkness within, I would have to journey deeper into the labyrinth of codes, secrets, and the shadowy echoes of my own soul. The nights on Blackwood Farm were not just dark, they were heavy, thick with a quiet anticipation that pressed against the windows like unseen hands. The kind of silence that doesn't soothe but warns. On my third night, I noticed the coffee mug left on the porch railing was inexplicably empty come morning. No spill, no disturbance, just gone. A simple mystery that twisted into something more sinister as days passed. By the fifth night, I wasn't alone. A presence lingered just beyond sight. The scarecrow in the cornfield, which I had dismissed as inert, now moved in unsettling ways. It shifted positions, seemed to watch me with an awareness that defied explanation. I came to this isolated farm seeking escape, a place to breathe after the crushing weight of divorce and a life unraveling in the city. Aunt Martha's farmhouse was supposed to be sanctuary, a place to gather strength. But it concealed shadows older than the prairie winds that swept across its fields. Evenings found me on the porch, clutching a lukewarm cup of black coffee, watching sunsets bleed into an endless horizon. The cold settled early, creeping beneath my skin, and as night fell, the temperature dropped sharply, swallowing the light and any hope of comfort. The scarecrow became the keeper of my dread, a silent sentinel that refused to remain lifeless. Its movements were subtle but deliberate, as if it was learning, watching, waiting. Its straw-stuffed limbs twisted into unnatural angles, its ragged coat fluttering without wind. One night, as the moon hid behind thick clouds, I caught a glimpse of it stepping off its post, its shadow stretching across the corn like dark fingers seeking prey. The coffee mug was there again, this time shattered, its contents spilled and staining the porch wood with a dark, stubborn stain that smelled faintly of decay. I realized then that the farm's silence was not peace but a pregnant hush, a prelude to something ancient and hungry. The night air thickened around me, the room growing colder with each passing second. Though the scarecrow's face was nothing more than stitched fabric and button eyes, I could feel the weight of its stare, a gaze heavy with ancient malice and silent intent. My breath caught in my throat, each inhale trembling and shallow. It remained still, its head tilted, as if assessing the fragile barrier between us. I wanted to scream, to shatter the glass and run, but my limbs refused to obey. I was frozen, caught in a web woven not by thread, but by a terror older than the farmhouse itself. The scarecrow slowly began to rise, the straw limbs creaking with unnatural life, as if awakening from a long slumber. The chair scraped back with a sound that echoed in the silent night. Outside, the wind whispered through the cornstalks like mournful voices, carrying with it the scent of earth, decay, and something faintly metallic. The shadows cast by the porch lights deepened, stretching like fingers seeking to grasp me. I wanted to believe it was a nightmare, a hallucination bred from exhaustion and isolation. But the chilling certainty settled deep in my bones, this was real. The scarecrow stepped forward, each movement jerky but purposeful, the ragged coat fluttering though the air was still. Its presence filled the porch, filling the night with a silence so thick it pressed against my ears. Without eyes to see, it nonetheless looked through me, beyond me, to the very core of my being. Then came the softest sound, a dry, rasping whisper, carried not on the wind but from the very fabric of the burlap face. Words I could not fully understand, yet somehow felt as warnings, as curses. The scarecrow lifted the empty mug, tipping it toward me in a slow, deliberate gesture. An invitation. Or a demand. I stumbled backward, retreating into the safety of the house, but the oppressive atmosphere followed me. The line between waking and dreaming blurred as I locked every door, barred every window, but no barrier seemed strong enough. Outside, the scarecrow returned to its post, but the sense of being watched, judged, hunted, lingered like a shadow I could not shake. That night marked the beginning of a deeper descent, the farm's silence was no longer passive. It was alive, listening, waiting. And I was its prey. A dry, rasping hiss filled the room, weaving through the shadows like the crackle of dead leaves. The sound was neither fully human nor wholly unnatural, a grotesque mimicry of speech that scraped against my sanity. Each syllable carried the weight of long-forgotten curses, whispered in a tongue older than the land itself. It took another step, closer now, the scrape of straw limbs sharper and more insistent. My grip on the bat tightened, knuckles blanching, yet the creature did not advance further. Instead, it extended one gnarled finger, trembling as if bearing a terrible weight, toward my chest. Remember, the hiss breathed, ragged but clear enough to chill me to the bone. Remember what? I choked out, heart hammering with terror and confusion. The scarecrow's button eyes seemed to glint with malicious delight, as if amused by my ignorance. It tapped its finger 3 times against the floorboards. Each tap echoed like a heartbeat, a call to something buried beneath the soil, beneath the farmhouse, beneath time itself. Suddenly, the room's air thickened, the boundaries between past and present dissolving like mist. The walls faded into the twisting cornfield outside, the moonlight casting long, eerie shadows through waving stalks that whispered secrets I could almost understand. Visions flooded my mind, a younger man, my Uncle Robert, laughing as he erected the original scarecrow years ago, unaware of the dark pact woven into the burlap and straw. The mine's collapse, the desperate miners whispered prayers, and a curse birthed from blood and betrayal. The scarecrow was more than guardian, it was a vessel, a prison for something ancient and vengeful that had fed on the farm's soil, growing stronger with each passing year. The scarecrow took another step, bridging the space between the spectral memories and my fragile reality. The stitched mouth parted once more, letting loose a sound like dry leaves scattering in a storm, a warning, a promise, or a death knell. I knew then that this was no longer a visitor seeking coffee. This was a reckoning long overdue, and the farmhouse, the land, and I were trapped in its shadow. The echo of boots on weathered wood, the predictable cadence of a soldier long gone but not forgotten. Perhaps it was the wind, sweeping through broken windows and rusted vents, playing tricks on the senses. Or maybe a restless spirit, bound to this place by duty unfulfilled. I forced myself to breathe steadily, each inhalation a silent prayer for reason. The base had been shut down for over 30 years, a relic of conflicts past, yet it felt alive tonight, as if the ghosts of its history were converging, marching through the shadows alongside me. The footsteps grew louder, more insistent, circling above like a ritualistic chant in wood and steel. I dared not move, afraid that any sudden sound might draw their attention. But they already knew I was here. A faint light flickered at the end of the hall, not from my failing flashlight but from a lantern swinging gently in the grasp of a figure clad in tattered military uniform. The boots stepped down the stairs, the weight of years pressing with every stride. The figure paused before me, face obscured by shadow and time, but I caught the glint of eyes, hollow, resolute, trapped between worlds. In that gaze, the weight of forgotten orders, of battles waged and lost, and of secrets buried beneath sand and stone. A voice, barely more than a whisper, reached my ears, words in a language I didn't understand but felt deep in my bones. The watch continues. Tonight, the barracks were not empty. They were haunted by duty unbroken, by memories that would not rest, and by the footsteps of the forgotten, marching on in endless vigil. The frost boot prints, each perfectly detailed, every ridge and tread mark sharply defined, seemed to stretch endlessly across the floor, reaching out to me as if to mark me for something beyond understanding. My heart thundered, a relentless drum in the frozen silence. Every fiber of my being screamed to flee, but the invisible weight anchored me like a forgotten relic in this haunted place. The room seemed to close in, the very walls trembling with the echoes of commands long silenced, yet somehow still obeyed. The whispers began, not audible, but felt, a buzzing in the marrow of my bones, like 1,000 distant voices chanting orders I couldn't quite decipher. The presence wasn't malevolent in a typical sense, it was something older, colder, unyielding, a discipline etched in the afterlife. Suddenly, the rows of beds began to shift. Sheets snapped taut as if unseen hands gathered them, folding with military precision. Pillows puffed out, as if inhaling breath from some ethereal lung. I caught the fleeting impression of a shape, barely there, half light, half shadow, standing rigid at the head of a bed. Its uniform was tattered, insignias faded, but unmistakably a soldier's. It turned slowly, its hollow eyes locking onto mine, the chill of its gaze penetrating deeper than the frosted air. A cold certainty settled within me, these were the remnants of those who never left, their souls trapped in eternal drill, their bodies long decayed, yet bound by unbroken duty. They were watching, waiting for a commander, an intruder summoned by fate to witness the endless march. As the temperature dropped further, frost spreading like veins across the floorboards, the boots' rhythmic pounding returned, now all around me, closing in. The walls echoed with the ghostly cadence, and the invisible soldiers began their spectral parade, circling, forming ranks, a haunting battalion in a forgotten war. I realized then that the Holloway Air Base was not just abandoned, it was a prison of discipline, a mausoleum of souls condemned to march forever, an echo of duty that could never be silenced. A fleeting moment of triumph, but the victory was short-lived. The luminous officer's form recoiled, then reformed, flickering and wavering like a flame caught in a draft. Its eyes, vague hollows in the shifting blur, fixed on me with an intensity that was almost tangible. The room's temperature plummeted further, ice crystals forming on the floor, encircling me like a ring of frost. The other distortions, silent sentinels in this spectral barracks, closed ranks, their forms more distinct now, as if emboldened by the officer's agitation. Their presence pressed upon me, a suffocating weight that threatened to crush not only my body but the very essence of my being. I stumbled backward, feeling the biting cold seep through my uniform, chilling my bones to the marrow. The officer raised a hand once more, not a salute, but a beckoning gesture. Not a request anymore, but a summons, an inexorable command that clawed at the edge of my sanity. I shook my head fiercely, desperate to deny the truth I felt crawling beneath my skin, the inevitability of joining their ranks, to become one more ghostly soldier trapped in eternal vigil. Then, the softest whisper echoed, unmistakably military cadence, faint but undeniable, "Fall in." Frozen in place, I understood the depths of my fate. The abandoned base was no longer simply a relic, it was a liminal space where time folded, where the living and the dead converged, and where the call to duty transcended mortality itself. And the silent orders echoing through empty halls, whispered by the restless dead who refused to be forgotten. The weight of that knowledge settles in my chest like a leaden shroud. Holloway Air Base is no mere ruin, it is a monument to endless duty, a spectral purgatory where time folds in on itself, and the living are pulled into the orbit of those who cannot rest. As I sit here, heart still racing, I wonder how many others have wandered into this loop, lost souls drawn to the call of duty beyond the grave, forever trapped in a cycle they cannot break. The base's haunting is a testament to the sacrifices made, but also a warning. Some orders never end, and some missions extend beyond the mortal coil. I do not know if I will ever truly escape the pull of Holloway's ghosts, nor whether my next steps will lead me back into their ranks or into the fragile freedom of life beyond their spectral grasp. But one thing is certain, the march continues, unending, and I carry with me the burden of having seen it. Beneath the cracked concrete and rusting metal of Holloway Air Base lies a story long buried, a tale of sacrifice, secrecy, and a haunting so profound that it transcends death itself. Decades ago, Holloway was a cutting-edge training facility, preparing recruits not just for combat, but for a covert program shrouded in silence. Official records speak of rigorous drills and relentless discipline, but whispered rumors among veterans tell of something darker, experiments on soldiers, aimed at creating perfect warriors who could endure beyond human limits. These soldiers were pushed to their breaking points, tested in ways that blurred the line between life and death. Some vanished during training, their disappearances quietly covered up, while others returned changed, shadows of men haunted by memories they could not share. As the Cold War escalated, Holloway became a crucible where the military sought to bind loyalty and duty into something eternal. A secret ritual, combining technology and forbidden rites, was said to have been performed in the dead of night. The ritual promised unwavering discipline and eternal vigilance, but at a terrible cost. Those who underwent it became bound to the base, their souls tethered forever to its walls. When budget cuts forced the closure of Holloway, the physical presence of the soldiers faded, but their essence did not. The spectral battalion, born of sacrifice and sealed by unbreakable oaths, remained, forever marching, forever guarding, forever bound by duty beyond death. The luminous officer who greeted the intruder is said to be the commander who led that final ritual, a figure caught between worlds, maintaining order in the liminal space where time folds and spirits linger. This haunting is both a monument to their unyielding commitment and a warning, the price of eternal duty is eternal imprisonment. And so, the spectral battalion continues their endless patrols, locked in a ritual of obedience, waiting for the next soul to answer the call, a call that may be impossible to refuse. The number, 347, seemed out of place, yet oddly significant, as if time itself had been suspended at that precise moment. The storm, the vanishings, the endless search, all converged on this frozen artifact. A sudden chill swept through the gallery. The air grew dense, charged with an unseen presence. My breath caught in my throat as the shadows behind me deepened, folding into shapes that danced just beyond the edge of my vision. Turning slowly, I caught a glimpse of a spectral figure standing by the corner of the exhibit, a sailor, dressed in the faded navy blue of the 19th century. His face was obscured by the darkness of the room, but I could feel the weight of his gaze, cold and unyielding. The captain's uniform, impeccably detailed despite the decades, shimmered faintly under the flickering lights. The sailor lifted a ghostly hand and pointed toward the chronometer, his movement slow, deliberate, like a silent command. I swallowed hard, stepping closer to the display. The glass fogged unnaturally, swirling with mist that seemed to rise from the wooden floorboards themselves. The temperature plummeted further, and the familiar sounds of the storm outside faded into an oppressive silence. Then, a voice, barely more than a whisper, echoed in the stillness, time, lost, never forgotten. The chronometer's hands suddenly twitched, shifting backward with a slow, inexorable motion. I felt myself drawn into its rhythm, as if caught in the endless loop of the fleet's doomed voyage. Behind me, the reflection in the glass shifted once more. Not mine, but the faces of sailors lost at sea, eyes wide with fear, mouths opening in silent screams, shadows of men forever trapped between worlds. I realized then that the exhibition was not merely a memorial but a prison, holding the voices and souls of those vanished in the black winter storm. And tonight, the boundary between past and present had thinned. The sailor's ghost stepped forward, reaching out toward me, a cold hand brushing the glass. Watch the time, Guardian. The storm returns. I stumbled back, heart hammering, flashlight shaking in my grip. The floor beneath me seemed to ripple like water, and the room blurred, caught between the living world and the depths of the Atlantic. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside the Maritime Heritage Museum, the lost fleet sailed once more, their voyage eternal, their voices whispered in the silence between the ticking of frozen time. The storm outside howled fiercely, its voice echoing through the museum walls like the deep, mournful sighs of the ocean itself. Inside the exhibit, that unseen presence grew heavier, pulling at my mind with an irresistible urgency, as if the trapped souls were calling out for a witness or perhaps a liberator. I took a deep breath, struggling to maintain clarity amid the swirling darkness and the pull of time. My trembling hand gripped the flashlight tighter as I resolved not to retreat. I will not let you be forgotten, I whispered to myself. Step by step, I approached the ancient maritime chronometer, pressing my palm against the cold glass case. The ticking echoed strangely, a rhythm that seemed to awaken memories long buried. Suddenly, visions flooded my mind, ships swallowed by merciless waves, cries for help lost beneath the roar of the sea, and the souls of steadfast sailors trapped between worlds, unable to find peace. They were not simply lost, but imprisoned by an ancient curse woven by the very sea, an endless cycle of storms and sorrow. I realized then that I had been chosen, a gatekeeper standing between past and present, bearing a sacred yet heavy responsibility. If I could decode their message, perhaps I could break this tragic loop and guide these souls away from the darkness, toward freedom and light. From the shadows came whispered words, gentle but powerful, "Do not fear, keeper of time. We wait for you to open the door." Outside, the wind joined the crashing waves, composing a mournful yet hopeful melody, a reminder that even beneath the deepest darkness, light always seeks a way through. With the whispered words lingering in the air, I felt a stirring deep within me, a call to courage and purpose that transcended fear. The chronometer's ticking grew louder, no longer a mere sound but a pulse synchronizing with my own heartbeat. The cold glass beneath my palm seemed to hum with energy, resonating with the stories etched into the timepiece and the souls it guarded. I stepped back slowly as the room darkened, the edges of the exhibit dissolving into shadow. Before me, the reflection of the spectral captain reappeared in the glass, no longer distant or haunting, but beseeching and patient. His hollow eyes locked onto mine, and in that gaze, I glimpsed a lifetime of duty, sacrifice, and an unfulfilled promise. Then the air shifted, the storm's fury outside momentarily stilled, and a faint glow began to emanate from the chronometer. The ancient brass mechanism unwound itself, the frozen hands beginning to move forward, marking not only the passage of time but the unraveling of a curse bound by it. Visions unfolded like a tapestry woven from salt and sorrow, the black winter storm's violent rage, the fleet's desperate attempts to navigate its wrath, and a shadowy force, something unnatural, that had pulled the ships off course, trapping their crews in an eternal loop between the living world and the abyss. I realized that these souls were caught in a liminal space, neither alive nor dead, their fates tied to a secret lost to history and the cruel whims of the sea. My role was clear, I was to be the key, the witness who would carry their stories forward and, through remembrance, grant them peace. With renewed resolve, I whispered a vow to the restless spirits, "I will tell your tale. I will break this cycle. You will not be forgotten." The captain's reflection softened, a subtle hint of gratitude shining through the empty sockets. The chronometer chimed, a sound both mournful and hopeful, echoing through the hall like the final call of a lost ship's bell. Outside, the storm began to ease, the boundary between past and present shimmering and fragile. The sea and sky separated once more, and a calm descended, carrying with it the promise of release. In that moment, I understood the profound truth: some stories are not merely history but living echoes that shape the future, waiting for a guardian brave enough to listen and wise enough to act. That partial message, the rumored distress call, had always been dismissed as folklore, a ghost story whispered among sailors to explain the inexplicable loss of so many lives. But now, standing face to face with the spectral sailor, I realized those tales might be more than myth. The cold presence before me was a remnant of that final, desperate communication, a last vestige of souls trapped between the crashing waves and the unforgiving sky. The sailor lifted his arm, the uniform's wet fabric dripping into the spreading pool beneath him. His gesture wasn't threatening, it was a beckoning, a call to witness. The ambient sounds of the sea and the storm swelled around me, thickening the air until it felt as though I were submerged in icy depths. My breath hitched as the chronometer's hands spun faster, the grinding noise reaching a mechanical crescendo. The scattered clocks harmonized into a chilling symphony, a haunting anthem of time undone and lives suspended. Suddenly, the room transformed. The gallery walls faded like mist, replaced by a vast, storm-tossed ocean under a sky black as despair. The deck of a warship creaked beneath my feet, the wind whipped salt spray into my face. Around me, ghostly figures labored against the storm, their faces pale and drawn, eyes hollow but burning with determination. The captain of the fleet, rigid and resolute, barked commands that echoed across the phantom waves. Yet, the meteorological horror bore down relentlessly, a malevolent force warping reality and bending time. The crew's struggle was endless, their sacrifice eternal. As the vision receded, the spectral sailor's form grew faint, his expression softening. I understood then that this haunting was a plea for remembrance, for the truth to be told and their story to be honored. The exhibition lights flickered back to normal, the steady ticking of the chronometer resuming its rightful pace. The coldness in the air lessened, leaving behind a quiet reverence. I stood alone once more, but forever changed. The Atlantic fleet's forgotten voices had reached me through the veil of history, asking for witness and closure. The next days passed in a blur as I delved deeper into archives, naval records, and forgotten logs. The Atlantic fleet's disappearance was shrouded in layers of official silence and cryptic reports, but beneath the surface, a more troubling story emerged, one of hubris, secrecy, and unnatural forces. Old sailors' journals spoke of strange lights on the horizon, sudden shifts in weather, and instruments that failed without explanation. Whispers told of a storm unlike any recorded, one that twisted time and space itself. Some believed the fleet had sailed into a rift between worlds, trapped in a liminal state where past, present, and future converged and blurred. Driven by a sense of duty to those lost souls, I returned to the Maritime Heritage Museum under the cover of night. The exhibition felt alive with a presence that was both sorrowful and urgent. I approached the chronometer, now a symbol of time broken and lives suspended. As I pressed my hand against the glass case, a surge of cold energy passed through me. Visions flooded my mind, ghostly crews struggling against impossible odds, the captain's resolute command, and the cruel sea swallowing them whole. I understood then that these spirits were caught in a loop, reliving their final moments, bound by the unresolved tragedy and the secrets buried beneath the waves. Determined to break the cycle, I began collaborating with maritime historians and occult scholars, piecing together rituals and legends that might grant these lost souls release. It was a journey fraught with eerie encounters, cryptic messages, and moments where the boundary between this world and the next thinned dangerously. The museum became a threshold, a place where the past whispered through artifacts and shadows danced just beyond sight. And through it all, the eyeless sailor remained, a silent sentinel urging me onward, reminding me that some stories refuse to be forgotten. The night before my departure, sleep eluded me. I lay awake, the silent museum echoing with memories I could no longer ignore. The whisper of waves, the distant toll of a bell, the soft rustle of naval coats, phantoms of a past still alive in shadows. The coordinates etched in the chronometers haunted my every thought, pulling me toward the unknown depths where the Atlantic fleet's final voyage had been swallowed whole. I imagined the spectral crew waiting beneath the waves, bound by duty yet yearning for release, their story incomplete without a witness to carry it forward. At dawn, I packed my gear, each piece heavy with unspoken promise and dread. The research vessel awaited, its steel hull a bridge between worlds, between the living and those lost to the sea's eternal embrace. As I stepped aboard, the salty air wrapped around me like an old friend, mingling with the weight of history pressing against my soul. Somewhere in the endless expanse of ocean, the past called out, and I was answering. This journey was no mere quest for knowledge, it was a passage toward understanding, forgiveness, and perhaps, redemption. The ship's engines thrummed beneath my feet, a steady heartbeat against the vast, restless ocean. As we left the safety of the harbor, the coastline receded, swallowed by mist and memory. The crew went about their routines, charts, knots, and calls, yet I felt an invisible current pulling me deeper into the story whispered by the Atlantic. Each night, the stars above seemed to shimmer with secrets, constellations shifting subtly as if guiding me toward the unknown coordinates etched into those ancient chronometers. Sleep remained elusive, my dreams were haunted by shadowy figures in naval uniforms, eyes hollow but filled with urgent longing, reaching through the veil between worlds. Days passed in a rhythm punctuated by the sea's endless song. On the fourth night, as the vessel crested a towering wave, I found myself drawn to the deck, the cold spray kissing my face, salt on my lips, and the weight of history settling in my bones. The water around us darkened unnaturally, depths concealing truths that defied human comprehension. Suddenly, the chronometers in my cabin, relics of that forgotten fleet, began to tick, soft at first, then rising to a chorus that filled the room with the cadence of a long-lost heartbeat. Their hands moved backward, tracing the moments before the fleet's disappearance, unraveling time itself. A cold whisper slipped through the night air, carrying the sorrow and resolve of souls trapped between past and present. The sea's silence broke with spectral voices chanting orders, the clash of rigging, and the relentless march of boots on wooden decks, an eternal roll call beneath the waves. And there, beneath the endless night sky, I understood, this voyage was not only through water but through time, memory, and the unyielding bonds of duty. What lies ahead is a journey beyond the known, a meeting between the living and the echoes of the lost, where the price of knowledge is measured in courage and the willingness to face the depths within and without. The night deepened, heavy and suffused with a spectral weight that pressed against my chest. The ocean around us seemed to darken further, waves growing restless as if stirred by unseen hands. I felt drawn to the bow, the ship's prow cutting through the water like a blade severing the veil between worlds. Stars flickered uncertainly overhead, as if caught in a breathless dance with something vast and unfathomable beneath the waves. The rhythmic ticking of the chronometers melded with the murmur of the sea, weaving an unearthly melody that wrapped around me, beckoning me closer to the horizon where past and present converged. Suddenly, a low fog rolled over the deck, thick and cold, swallowing the ship in a quiet shroud. Shapes began to emerge, faint and flickering, ghostly silhouettes of sailors standing at attention, their eyes hollow but filled with unspoken stories. Their forms shimmered in the mist, anchored by the endless vigil of duty that bound them beyond death. I stepped forward, heart pounding with reverence and fear, feeling the invisible thread that connected us, a link forged in loyalty, sacrifice, and the unyielding call of the sea. The air grew electric with whispered commands, the unending roll call echoing across time and tide. As I reached out, the spectral captain turned his gaze toward me, eyes like voids shimmering with a tragic light. A silent understanding passed between us, this was no mere haunting but a legacy, an eternal watch that awaited my presence, my choice. The sea held its breath, waiting for my answer. Would I step beyond the boundary, join the ranks of those who serve forever, or return to the shore, carrying their stories as a whispered warning? In the stillness of the night, beneath the vast canvas of stars, I realized that some callings do not end with life but echo endlessly, waiting for the willing heart to answer once more. If you wish, I can continue weaving this tale deeper into the mystery of the Atlantic fleet and the fate of those lost souls. Gloria's eyes narrowed thoughtfully as she stirred her tea. That smell, she said slowly, it's been haunting that bakery since your grandfather passed. Folks say the place holds on to its memories. Not just of the bread, but of the lives it fed, the dreams it baked alongside each loaf. Her words planted a seed of unease in me. Memories trapped in walls, a house that remembers its past like a living thing. The idea felt strange but hauntingly plausible. I decided to keep a journal, to write down every oddity, every whisper of scent or shadow that disturbed the fragile veil between now and then. That night, the bakery breathed again. As I lay on my cot, the faintest melody drifted from the kitchen, a soft, rhythmic thumping, like the gentle kneading of dough. The amber glow pulsed once more from the oven, steady and hypnotic. The warmth wasn't physical, it was something else, something that reached into my chest and wrapped around my heart like an echo of a long-forgotten lullaby. Curiosity wrestled with dread, but I rose and moved toward the kitchen. The air was thick with the rich aroma, a scent so vivid it brought tears to my eyes. And then I saw it, footprints, small, delicate impressions in flour dust scattered across the floor, leading to the counter and back into the darkness of the ovens. No footprints led away. I knew then that I wasn't alone in the bakery. Something lingered here. Not malevolent, but trapped, fermenting with the passage of time, waiting for release or recognition. Each night, the presence grew stronger. The oven's glow deepened, a silent beacon in the darkness. The scent of baking bread became a balm and a torment, stirring a sense of home and loss intertwined. I began to see fleeting figures in the corners of my vision, shadowy outlines of a man bent over dough, a woman arranging loaves, children stealing warm rolls with mischievous grins. The bakery was alive with echoes of a past that refused to fade, the fermentation of memories too rich to be contained by silence. I realized my inheritance was not just the bricks and mortar but a legacy of love, labor, and longing pressed into the very air, a spectral recipe waiting to be understood. If you wish, I can continue to unravel the stories woven into the bakery's history, explore the family secrets that bind the living and the dead, and reveal what it truly means to inherit a place where time ferments like yeast, swelling with possibility and peril. The clock's hands crept toward 3 with agonizing slowness, each tick a hammer blow in the silence. The bakery seemed to hold its breath, the air thickening as if time itself were fermenting alongside the yeast. My fingers trembled over the pages of the notebook, tracing the hastily scrawled words that had haunted me for weeks. Then, as the minute hand settled precisely on the 3, a faint warmth blossomed from the oven, soft, amber light seeping through the cracks in its ancient iron door. The air around me shifted, fragrant tendrils of sourdough and cinnamon swirling and twisting, filling the room with impossible scents that carried the weight of memory and loss. A low thudding began, rhythmic and steady, like the heartbeat of the bakery itself. At first, I thought it was my own pulse, but the sound deepened and echoed, spreading through the walls, through the floorboards, until it felt as though the very building was awakening from decades of slumber. My eyes darted to the oven door, which now pulsed gently as if breathing. The faint outline of a figure emerged from the amber glow, a man, scarred and worn, kneeling before the oven, his hands covered in flour and burn marks, performing the ritual of dough kneading. I recognized the posture, my grandfather's. A whispering filled the room, indistinct words woven into the scent, stories folded into the warmth. I could almost hear the voices of the lost bakers, the men and women who had worked in these walls, their hopes and regrets rising like steam from the ovens that had once breathed life into this place. They were still here. Bound by unfinished work, by promises made and broken, their spirits fermenting in the spaces between flour and fire, memory and silence. I felt their presence not as fear, but as a profound ache, a longing for release, for remembrance, for the peace that only the living could grant. That night, I understood, the bakery was not just a building. It was a vessel of time and love and sorrow, steeped in the essence of those who had poured their lives into every loaf. And I was now part of its story. The night stretched long and surreal, the boundary between past and present dissolving like flower dust in the dim light. The bakery was no longer a silent tomb but a living memory, a spectral hearth glowing with the warmth of unfinished labor. Each breath I took was thick with the yeasty scent of the rising dough, every sound, kneading, rolling, the scrape of wooden paddles, etched itself deeply into my soul. The invisible hands pressed and folded alongside mine, steady and purposeful, as if I were not alone but the newest link in a long unbroken chain. The recipe on the worn page seemed to pulse with life, words shimmering faintly as if alive, guiding me with a quiet insistence. It was no longer just about restoring a building or reopening a bakery, it was about restoring a legacy, honoring those bound to this place by duty and love beyond death. I could feel the presence of each family member, my grandmother's meticulous touch, my uncle's steady rhythm, woven through the very air and flour. The pain of loss mingled with hope, a bittersweet symphony carried on the scent of bread and the ghostly warmth of ovens long cold. As the clock hands neared 4 a.m., the activity began to fade, the echoes of baking dissolving into silence once more. The flour footprints vanished as if swept away by an unseen broom. The oven's glow dimmed until only the quiet hum of the night remained. But the bond had been sealed. I was no longer just a visitor. I was a keeper of memories, a guardian of unfinished work. And the dead no longer fermented alone. The song played on, its melancholy chords weaving around us like an invisible thread, binding the moment tighter. Each lyric echoed the unspoken tension between us, the silences, the doubts, the drifting hearts. Mia's eyes glistened, reflecting the scattered city lights and the storm gathering quietly inside her. I reached out tentatively, fingers brushing her hand. It was a small gesture, but the weight of it felt immense, a fragile bridge over the widening gap. The music shifted again, the haunting voice now softly singing of choices made and paths not taken. It was no longer background noise, it was a message, a confession laid bare in melody and verse. A sudden gust stirred the car, rattling the windows and carrying with it the faint scent of pine and something darker, the sharp tang of cold earth and old regrets. Mia shivered, and I pulled my jacket tighter around us, as if trying to shield her from the creeping chill that wasn't just outside. The radio's static returned briefly, a flicker of white noise that seemed to pulse with urgency, before fading once more into the haunting song. My heart pounded with a rhythm unaligned with the music, a silent warning buried beneath the notes. Then the headlights beyond the lookout flickered, casting long, restless shadows that danced at the edge of the cliff. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath, the valley below, the distant stars, the fragile peace between us. The song ended abruptly, replaced by the eerie quiet of the night. The radio crackled with a whispered voice, distorted but unmistakably human, repeating a single phrase with a chilling persistence. "Remember me." I turned to Mia, her face pale, eyes wide with a terror that mirrored my own. The night around us deepened, the shadows lengthening, the air thickening with memories better left untouched. And in that suspended moment, I understood, some songs carry more than just sound. They carry echoes, echoes of promises, losses, and a past that refuses to stay buried. The darkness of Blackwood Ridge was no longer just a backdrop. It was alive, watching, waiting. And we had just become part of its story. A deep, unnatural silence settled around us, thick and suffocating, like the world itself was holding its breath. The only sound was the soft hiss of the radio, its voice now speaking directly to us, intimate and invasive. "You carry what is needed," it said, the words like a whisper pressed right against my ear despite the car's closed windows. "But the debt remains unpaid." Mia's hand found mine, trembling. I squeezed it, but my own heart raced as the realization took hold. This was no glitch or prank. Something unseen had found us, threading itself through the static, reaching into our lives with eerie precision. I glanced at the dark forest beyond the railing, shadows pooling like ink. The wind whispered warnings through the pines, the branches scraping a slow, mournful rhythm. The radio hissed again, the voice now more urgent. "The night holds its secrets close, but they hunger for release. What you hide will be the price you pay." Suddenly, the headlights flickered and dimmed, the dashboard lights blinking erratically. The engine turned over once, twice, then fell silent. The car was dead. Mia's breath hitched. "What do they want?" she asked, voice barely more than a breath. I swallowed hard. "I don't know. But I think we just crossed a line." The temperature inside the car dropped sharply, frost creeping along the edges of the windshield. Outside, the night deepened, and in the darkest corner of the lookout, I could have sworn a shadow shifted, waiting, watching. No amount of logic could unravel the impossible truth we faced. Some messages are not meant for radios or ears, but for souls tangled in unfinished stories, restless and patient. And here, under a sky crowded with silent stars, our story had only just begun. Outside the car, the darkness pressed against the windows like a living thing, thick and suffocating, swallowing the world whole. The city lights, once distant beacons, had vanished as if erased from existence, and the stars had abandoned the sky, leaving nothing but an oppressive void. Inside, the silence was shattered only by the faint, rasping voice from the dead radio still clutched in my hand, a nursery rhyme twisted by malevolence and cold intent. "Michael and Mia, kissing," it whispered, the words curling like smoke in the stale air. I blinked. My name wasn't Michael. Mia's eyes locked with mine, wide, frightened. She knew it too. This entity, this watcher, had our names wrong. Imperfect knowledge in an otherwise impossible situation. "Correction," the voice said, as if reading my thoughts. "Jason and Mia, forgive me. So many frequencies to monitor, so many couples to observe." A wave of nausea hit me hard. We were not alone. This was a pattern, a ritual it had performed before, a sinister game played across unknown victims. Mia's fingers dug into my arm, white crescents pressing into my skin. "Jason and Mia," the voice stretched our names into unrecognizable shapes. "Will you return the kiss?" "What does that mean?" Mia's whisper was fragile, trembling. The radio answered without pause, "It means exactly what it says. A kiss was taken. It must be returned. Balance must be maintained." "Maybe we should just do it," Mia urged, voice barely steady. "Maybe it'll stop." Logic screamed at me to resist. This was madness, a manipulation by something beyond reason. But fear demanded action. I leaned forward, lips meeting hers in a mechanical, reluctant kiss. The radio screamed a high, shattering tone, forcing us apart. "No, no, no," the voice scolded harshly. "That's not returning. That's repeating. The kiss must be returned to me." Suddenly, the air inside the car grew frigid, breath crystallizing before us. Ice spread rapidly across the windshield, intricate and unnatural patterns of frost weaving and twisting. In the center, the frost shaped a pair of lips, huge, frozen, beckoning. The horror hit me like a thunderclap. It wanted us to kiss the windshield. To return the kiss to it. Mia's silent tears froze on her cheeks, her hands as cold as the encroaching frost. The radio fell silent, replaced by a low, vibrating hum in tune with the spreading ice. "We're not doing that," I said, voice trembling but resolute. "Whatever you are, we're not playing your game." The hum grew into a shriek that tore at my ears, piercing and raw. The ice lips parted, revealing a black void beyond, a darkness that swallowed the light, the warmth, our hope. Desperate, I lunged for the radio, wrenching it free despite the jagged plastic biting into my fingers. Sparks flew as wires snapped, and the shriek cut off instantly. The frost froze mid-spread, unmoving but unmelting. The silence was deafening. Then, suddenly, the engine roared to life on its own. Headlights blazed bright, almost painfully so. The heater roared, blasting warmth that melted the frost in minutes. Our phones chimed in perfect sync, service restored like a bomb. I looked down at the broken radio, a useless husk of plastic and wires in my bleeding hands. Mia met my gaze, expression unreadable in the harsh glow. Without a word, I opened the window and hurled the radio into the darkness. The crack of impact echoed faintly, swallowed by the black night. But as the car's warmth returned and normalcy seemed to settle once more, the oppressive void outside still lingered, waiting, watching, patient. And deep down, I knew this was far from over. The wind's howl intensified as night deepened, carrying a mournful cadence that seeped into every crevice of the weather station. It was more than just the raw forces of nature, it felt like a voice, a restless presence echoing through the skeletal frame of the old building. I settled into a metal chair beneath a flickering fluorescent light, pulling my jacket tighter as I flipped through one of the log books. The faded entries, meticulous and methodical, chronicled the daily rhythms of the wind and storms, as if the station itself were a sentinel recording the heartbeat of the earth. Outside, the anemometers twitched in the rising gusts, their needles quivering as though anxious. The barometer on the wall creaked faintly, its dial dancing erratically beyond its normal range. I glanced at the clock, 3:03 a.m. Suddenly, the static from the old radio equipment crackled to life, slicing through the silence like a knife. A low, rhythmic pulse emerged, almost like Morse code, yet warped, otherworldly. I leaned closer, heart tightening, as distorted voices threaded through the noise, voices begging, warning, whispering in a language I couldn't understand yet felt compelled to decode. The flickering light stuttered and died, plunging the room into darkness except for the ghostly glow of the equipment screens, casting eerie shadows that danced on the concrete walls. A chill ran down my spine. The wind outside no longer sounded natural, it had become a chorus of whispers and faint laughter, a spectral congregation drawn to this forgotten outpost. A sudden knock echoed through the metal door, sharp and insistent. I froze, breath caught, as the wind seemed to hush around me. The knocking repeated, slow, measured, deliberate, as if the station itself was calling me to face whatever lay hidden beneath the cold night. I rose slowly, hands trembling, moving toward the door. The whispering voices crescendoed, swirling like a storm inside my mind, urging me onward. Behind the door, silence waited. Or perhaps, something far worse. With a hesitant hand, I reached for the handle, bracing myself to open and step into the unknown. And as the door creaked ajar, the storm within and without seemed to merge, a gateway not only to the dark night but to the restless secrets the weather station had kept for decades. The room seemed to pulse with an energy not of this world, the glow from the monitors casting eerie shadows that danced like restless spirits on the cracked concrete walls. The air grew thick, heavy with an invisible weight that pressed down on my chest, making every breath a struggle. The sound of the wind outside escalated, now a deep, unearthly chant that resonated through the metal structure as if the very bones of the station were groaning in agony. I dared not look away from the door. The silence between the messages was shattered by a sudden, sharp clang echoing from somewhere deep within the building, like a heavy metal gate slamming shut, sealing fate. A cold hand seemed to brush the back of my neck, and I spun around, flashlight raised, but the room was empty save for the trembling shadows. The monitors flickered violently, and in the brief flash, I caught a glimpse of something, a figure, half seen, half forgotten, standing just beyond the edge of the monitor's glow, its eyes glowing faintly with a pale blue fire. My instincts screamed at me to flee, but my body was rooted to the spot, caught in the silent web of something ancient and relentless. Then, the whispers began, low, unintelligible murmurs that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. They grew louder, twisting into faint words. "Leave, not safe, they are coming." The monitors blinked off simultaneously, plunging me into utter darkness, broken only by the howling wind now pounding against the building like a furious beast. I stumbled toward the exit, heart hammering, every step resonating with the echoes of unseen footsteps following close behind. Outside, the night was colder than before, the sky a canvas of black void pierced by no stars. The wind's cry was no longer natural, it was a summons, a call to those who dared to listen. I didn't look back. Because I knew, this place was not just abandoned. It was waiting. The pulsating thumps reverberated through the room like the slow heartbeat of some colossal, unseen creature awakening beneath the earth. The shadows in the corner coalesced further, twisting and elongating into a form that was both there and not there, an impossible geometry that defied understanding. It shimmered in and out of perception, the very fabric of its shape warping like smoke caught in a cold draft. My skin prickled with cold dread, muscles tensed for flight but trapped by the icy grip of fear. Time seemed to stretch, each strobe of light freezing the world in fractured snapshots of terror. Within those fractured glimpses, the entity's eyes, if they could be called that, blinked open. Two orbs of liquid shadow, depths of void pulling at the edges of my sanity. Then came the sound, not a sound, really, but a vibration that rose within my chest, a low whispering chorus of voices just beyond hearing. They spoke in a language I couldn't understand, syllables curling like smoke into the stale air of the break room. The pressure built until my head felt like it would split open, the voices screaming in silence. With a desperate surge, I lunged toward the door, pounding with trembling fists. The entity flickered violently, as if repelled by my movement, but the shadows stretched, tendrils reaching for me like grasping fingers of frost. "Leave," the voices breathed, coalescing into a singular word that thundered inside my skull. My fingers found the handle, yanking it open to the raging storm outside. The wind howled with unholy ferocity, whipping around me as I stumbled into the night, the oppressive darkness swallowing the station hole behind me. I didn't look back as I fled down the hill, the echoes of the pulsing heartbeat trailing behind me like a curse. The anemometer's chaotic dance ceased abruptly, the monitors died, and the station fell silent once more. But the weight of what I'd seen, felt, and heard lingered, seeping into my bones and whispering a cruel truth: some places never truly die. They wait, breathing, watching, pulsing in the shadows, until the next soul wanders too close to their forgotten secrets. The memory of that night settled into my bones like a cold wound that refused to heal. I left the weather station behind, but it never truly left me. Every gust of wind seemed to carry a whisper of that impossible storm, every shadow a fleeting echo of the thing in the corner. The word, SIA, lingered in my mind, an unspoken warning carved into my very soul. In the weeks that followed, sleep became a scarce refuge. My dreams were invaded by visions of spiraling winds and flickering screens, of icy appendages reaching from unseen dimensions. And always, beneath the turmoil, the relentless pulse of that otherworldly heartbeat, counting down to some inevitable reckoning. I know now that some places are more than abandoned buildings, they are thresholds between worlds, where the fragile veil that separates reality thins to a translucent membrane. And sometimes, that membrane tears. I returned to my daily life, but with every moment, I felt the station's grip tighten, a silent summons pulling me back toward the hilltop, toward the storm I barely escaped. Some warnings are not mere advice, they are premonitions. And I fear the day will come when I must heed SIA once more. Until then, I carry the wind's howl within me, a reminder that certain secrets are best left undisturbed. The quiet that follows such nights is never truly peaceful. It lingers with a weight that presses deep into the bones, a subtle reminder that some doors, once opened, can never be closed again. The wind carries memories older than any living thing, whispering secrets in languages forgotten by time, a language that slips past the mind's defenses and settles in the soul. Saya. A word both simple and profound, a warning that transcends geography and reason. It humbles me to realize that this message, this plea to flee, came from the unseen forces swirling just beyond the veil of reality. The wind, in its restless flight, does not forget. It remembers the forgotten, mourns the lost, and seeks to protect those who still walk between worlds. Sometimes, when the night is still and the air holds its breath, I listen closely. I hear the wind speaking. I feel its touch, cold, fleeting, yet impossible to ignore. And I wonder who else might hear it, waiting silently for their own moment to understand, to remember, to heed the call. For now, I remain vigilant, knowing that some shadows are never truly gone. They wait in the silence, in the cold breath of the wind, reminding us that the past is never far behind, and that some places are better left abandoned. The tapping came earlier around midnight, more aggressive than before. It echoed against the walls of my cabin, sharp and insistent, like the staccato beating of desperate wings. I pulled the covers over my head, but the sound pierced the thin fabric, invading my thoughts, growing louder with every passing minute. Then came the laughter, an eerie, chilling sound that seemed to resonate not just through the air, but deep within the bones. It was both playful and malevolent, a sound that froze the blood and warped the silence into something sinister. I knew, without question, that it wasn't human. It was something else, something ancient and hungry. The yellow eye appeared again, now not just outside the window, but glimpsed in every reflective surface, the polished wood of the table, the glass of the lantern, even the sheen of the floorboards. It was watching, waiting, measuring my fear. Sleep became impossible. Each night I lay awake, caught between dread and fascination, torn between fleeing and uncovering the truth hidden beneath the shadows of the sanctuary. Dr. Winter's warnings replayed in my mind: skin takers, spirits caught between worlds, owls that were not owls but vessels for something far older. I found myself drawn to the raptor room, the scent of feathers and earth grounding me even as the darkness around me deepened. There, among the silent, watchful birds, I began to understand that the sanctuary was a thin veil stretched over a fragile boundary. A boundary that the skin takers sought to cross, wearing borrowed forms but never truly belonging. Each night the presence grew stronger, the laughter closer, the tapping more desperate, a reminder that some spirits do not rest until they reclaim what was taken from them, until the balance is restored. And I realized then, with a quiet and terrible certainty, that the sanctuary was no longer just a place of healing for wounded birds. It had become a crossroads, a meeting place of worlds, and I was caught in the middle, a reluctant witness to the ancient dance of shadow and light, of life and death, of freedom and possession. The voice, cold and rasping like wind over dead leaves, whispered directly into the hollow of my mind. You cannot hide. You belong here. We have waited. Panic twisted in my gut, yet beneath it stirred a strange familiarity, an echo of a bond one had long forgotten, buried beneath years of doubt and fear. The eye, vast and unblinking, filled the shattered window frame, its amber depths swirling with patterns both beautiful and terrible, as if the very essence of some forgotten world was trapped within it. The feathers around it shimmered, dissolving into translucent skin that glowed faintly in the moonlight. A pale hand reached through the broken glass, slender fingers tipped with sharp talons that gleamed like obsidian. The chill that accompanied its touch was unlike anything natural, as if it carried the weight of forgotten centuries. I wanted to flee, to scream, but my body was locked in place by the weight of unseen chains. The voice continued, not aloud, but inside me, weaving words and images, memories not my own. Stories of a pact sealed in shadow, of guardians born to walk between the worlds of the living and the lost. Of a destiny entwined with the owls, those messengers perched on the edge of worlds, watching, waiting. We are bound by blood and feather, by night and silence. We are the watchers, the takers, the keepers of the thin places. You fled, but you carry the mark. The song of the wind calls you home. The laughter returned, softer now, like a lullaby twisted by grief and longing. It wrapped around me, coaxing and commanding, promising both release and surrender. My vision blurred, the edges of the room bending and melting into the shadows. The taloned hand touched my cheek, cold as the grave, yet a strange warmth blossomed beneath its touch, an invitation and a warning intertwined. Join us. Remember who you are. The shattered glass crunched beneath invisible feet as the presence stepped fully inside the room. Its form was no longer merely hinted at, it stood before me, tall and elegant, a fusion of man and owl, flesh and feather, light and shadow. Its golden eye locked with mine, searching, knowing. In that moment, I understood. This was no mere haunting. It was a calling, a reckoning with the past, a bridge between worlds, a chance to reclaim what had been lost. And as the wind whispered through the broken window, carrying the scent of copper and rot, I felt the first flicker of acceptance stir within me. The night was deep, the silence profound, and the journey was only beginning. The lichen glowed faintly beneath the microscope's lens, an eerie bioluminescence that pulsed in time with my own heartbeat. It was as if this living patch, alien and unnerving, was no mere parasite but a sentinel, watching, waiting, merging with me. Days passed, and the symptoms deepened. The pulsing at the site spread like wildfire beneath my skin, a creeping numbness mingled with sparks of strange, electric sensation. At night, my dreams twisted into watery depths, vortexes swirling with faces both familiar and foreign, whispering names, secrets, and warnings from the cold, black reservoir. The dam, once just a concrete barrier, now felt alive, a living tomb breathing slow and deep. Its surface shimmered with subtle ripples even on windless nights, and the water's inky blackness seemed to conceal shapes moving just beneath, watching. One evening, as I took readings at the edge of the reservoir, the water stirred without wind. A dark silhouette rose, a figure shaped like the dam itself, monumental and oppressive, its eyes glinting with the same pale blue-green hue as the lichen on my arm. It spoke without sound, its message flooding my mind with chilling clarity: you belong. You carry the bond. The water remembers. Fever burned through me. My skin became slick with moisture even when the air was dry, and the lichen grew, its roots threading deep into my veins. The boundary between myself and the dam dissolved with each passing day. I found myself drawn irresistibly to the water's edge, compelled to listen to the whispering currents and the weight of unseen presence pressing beneath. The night grew cold and thick with mist. The ripples in the reservoir became restless, and from its depths, the echo of a voice emerged, my own, calling from beneath the surface, distorted and distant, begging for release. My reflection on the water no longer looked like mine, it shimmered and fractured, revealing fragments of something older, submerged. I understood then that I was no longer merely observing the dam, I was part of its story, a fragment of the deep, tangled history held within the dark reservoir's embrace. The dam was not a structure to be measured or dismantled, but a sentinel itself, a guardian of secrets older than memory. And now, the echoes of the forgotten flood through me, urging me to listen, to remember, to join the watch beneath the water's surface, forever tethered to the shadowed depths, a voice calling in the silence of the deep. The revelation clawed its way into my consciousness like a creeping tide, something alive, something ancient, imprisoned beneath the dam's cold facade. The glowing lichen, the whispers from the depths, the impossible footprints, they were all part of a slow unraveling, an awakening of what had been bound beneath. Each night the voices grew stronger, their tones shifting from fragmented whispers to clear, urgent calls. They spoke of pain and betrayal, of being trapped between worlds, forgotten by time but remembered in blood and stone. They told me that the dam was no mere barrier against water, but a seal against the abyss below, a prison for a primordial force whose reach extended far beyond the valley. As the lichen spread further over my body, I felt the dam's ancient sorrow seep into my bones. The patches pulsed with the rhythm of the reservoir's heartbeat, and in their glow, visions flickered, dark waters churning with unseen shapes, spectral hands clawing at the walls, a darkness that thirsted for release. The dam's engineers, in their hubris and desperation, had unknowingly become wardens of a living nightmare. Their sacrifices had bought time, but the price was steep. Now, as the containment weakens, I am both witness and inheritor of their burden. I find no peace in sleep, only restless watchfulness at the water's edge. The boundary thins each night. And when the moonlight touches the reservoir's surface, I swear I see a shadow moving just beneath, a vast form waiting patiently for the day the concrete cracks, and the ancient awakens once more. The dam's secret is no longer buried. It courses through me, a legacy etched in flesh and stone, a call to guard the prison or be consumed by the darkness it holds. It is reaching out, patiently, deliberately, seeking communion, connection, evolution. The dam is no longer a prison but a conduit, a living testament to the symbiosis between humanity and something far older, far wiser. As the night deepens and the reservoir's surface reflects the cold stars above, I feel the boundaries between flesh and stone, water and earth, begin to blur. I am no longer merely a man sent to assess a structure, I am a guardian of this fragile balance, a bridge between the world seen and unseen. The transformation is not an end but a beginning, a renewal born of acceptance and surrender to forces beyond understanding. And in this new existence, I am neither lost nor alone. The voices beneath the water sing in unison now, no longer echoes of despair, but hymns of awakening. The lichen no longer frightens me, for it has become part of me, and I part of it. Together, we will wait, we will watch, and when the time is right, we will reach beyond the valley, carrying the ancient wisdom hidden beneath the concrete to the world above. This is my vigil, my purpose, standing sentinel at the edge of worlds, listening to the voices beneath the water, heralding the slow, inevitable dawn of a new symbiosis. The sickly yellow light cuts through the shadows like a blade. The metal monstrosity's gaze locks onto me, a mechanical predator detecting its prey. My heartbeat hammers in my ears, every muscle tensing for flight, yet my limbs refuse to obey. The warehouse seems to contract around me, the walls groaning softly as if breathing in anticipation. The oil-like substance on the floor pulses in rhythm with the figure's deliberate movements. It coils and creeps, a living black tide drawn to its master, wrapping the skeletal frame in a sinister, undulating armor. The clinking and clanking of its shifting tool hands grow louder, each metamorphosis a grotesque symphony of rust and steel. I catch a glimpse of something terrible in the lantern's flickering glow, a faint reflection not of the warehouse, but of countless lost souls trapped within the rails and machinery. A chorus of silent screams embedded in the metal, begging for release. Then, as if sensing my frozen terror, the creature begins to advance. Each step shakes the concrete floor beneath me, echoing through the cavernous space like a death march. The temperature plunges, my breath freezing in the air. I know I cannot stay hidden much longer. Summoning every ounce of courage, I squeeze my eyes shut, then sprint from behind the lathe. The figure's light swings wildly, illuminating my frantic escape as I dodge through shifting shadows and reconfigured aisles. The warehouse warps, corridors stretching and twisting impossibly as if alive itself, guiding me toward an unknown fate. The monstrous conductor looms behind me, its clangorous footsteps relentless, growing ever closer. I burst through a rusted door and find myself outside, gasping under the cold night sky. The warehouse behind me pulses with an eerie blue light, its breath steady and unyielding. Somewhere deep inside, I understand the truth. The Westlake Rylard is not just an abandoned building, it is a living entity, a prison, and a sentinel. And I have become part of its story. The night watchman who glimpsed its hunger, but barely escaped to tell the tale. Their fate was inevitable. Resistance was anticipated but ultimately futile. You have a choice, surrender willingly and gain purpose, or be reclaimed forcibly and become part of the endless machinery. I swallowed the lump rising in my throat, eyes flickering to the utility pole, my only hope. With a burst of desperate energy, I lunged for it, grasping the cold wires and steel with trembling hands. The mechanical figure's clanking footsteps thundered behind me as I began my perilous descent. Every muscle burned, the wind whipping fiercely as I lowered myself toward the gravel below, the warehouse's monstrous maw slowly closing behind me. Landing hard but alive, I didn't look back. The night swallowed my retreating figure as the building's mechanical heart pulsed ominously, waiting, patient, eternal. I had escaped the midnight mechanic's grasp, for now. The warehouse breathes through me now, its pulse synced with the rhythm of my own heart. In those dreams, I am no longer Daniel Mercer, I am the whisper in the metal, the shadow behind every flicker of light, the silent sentinel of forgotten iron and rust. The machinery is no longer cold and lifeless but alive with my awareness, watching, waiting, ready. Each night at 3:03 a.m., the lanterns ignite, not with flame, but with the glow of my presence, a beacon signaling the continuation of a purpose far older and stranger than any human mind can grasp. And though I fled the building, my essence lingers within its walls, a ghost in the wires, forever bound to the steel skeleton that claimed me. Somewhere, the next watchman begins his rounds, unaware that he walks beneath my gaze. And the warehouse waits, patient and hungry, for the moment to call him home.